Chapter 48. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and whistled. A handsome spear falcon swooped down from the sky and landed steadily on His Royal Highness's shoulder. The snow-white six-year phoenix stretched out its head and rubbed its master's cheek. Su Fengnian didn't care about the pain. He flicked the scarlet beak of his beloved pet with a finger and glanced at the white-faced man who was about to attack. He sneered, 100 Liangzhou cavalry are going up the mountain with crossbows. I'd like to see who's going to kill who. The freckled woman who pretended to be a rich man was still not afraid. She angrily said, "How dare you?" Su Fengnian laughed wildly, "In Beiliang, there's nothing I don't dare to do." The Dongyue machete man frowned. The secret report did say that there were 100 Beiliang cardinal crossbows stationed at the foot of Mount Wudong. The crossbows made by Beiliang were much more powerful than ordinary crossbows. Many of the West Chu great halberd soldiers were killed by these weapons on the battlefield. A few dozen crossbows were insignificant in a battle, but if more than 800 of them were gathered together, it was enough to intimidate people. Su Fengnian tapped his nose and said lecherously, "Hey, little sparrow, come to my big bed and have a good fight. Let's fight for 300 rounds. It's best if it's a baby sparrow. I'm good at all kinds of martial arts. I'll definitely let the sparrow go up the mountain happily, but it's too weak to go down." The woman who called herself I gritted her teeth. But this time, before she could kick and curse, the man who looked like a man from the netherworld leaped and was only 5 steps away from Su Fengnian. With a gust of cold wind, he said with a piercing voice, "You're not human." At that moment, Su Fengnian remembered the cold wind of walking on a snowy night. Old Huang's thin body was in front, but the wind was still blowing in all directions. The chill was bone-chilling. Wang Zhongluo stood between His Royal Highness and the beardless man. His Taoist robe swelled up like a bowl. He took the hit head-on. The old Taoist leader's feet used his pair of dark-colored light boots as the center. A circle of soil splashed out, but the old Taoist's tall and sturdy body did not move at all, just like the Wudong Peak. Not only did the qi flowing within the Taoist robe not weaken, it even swelled up after eating its fill. The man with rosy cheeks quickly retracted his hand and asked suspiciously, "Big yellow court. Are you Wang Zhongluo?" The old Taoist who had once been sprayed with tea by Su Fengnian was as well-mannered as ever. He did not retaliate and smiled, "That's me." The beardless man cautiously retreated to his original position. He bent over and said a few words to the woman who was mocked by Su Fengnian as a little sparrow. Her expression was gloomy and uncertain, but she tried her best to restrain herself. She raised her small hand that was holding the 2 twin luminous pearls and pointed at the Wudong sect leader and scolded, "Smelly cow nose, you want to side with the guy behind you? Aren't you afraid that your entire sect will suffer a calamity?" The 4 words of the black tortoise will reign at the foot of the mountain had been hanging there for hundreds of years. "I think it's quite imposing. Do you believe that I will smash it?" The old Taoist laughed and lowered his hands. His fluttering sleeves slowly calmed down. He did not respond to the domineering woman's insults and turned to look at His Royal Highness. Su Fengnian returned the favor and laughed evilly, "Yo, sparrow sister, you have such a big mouth. I like it. You want to smash the archway? You still have to ask your future husband if he agrees." The lonely souls of Dongyue laughed bitterly in their hearts. This Prince Liang's mouth was even sharper than a knife. How did lame Su train such an unscrupulous son? Was it because his ears were bad that he did not hear the 2 words, "this prince"? Or was he pretending to be deaf? Did he really think that no one in the world could be a match for the Great Pillar State? The 100 skilled crossbowmen of the Phoenix Battalion who had abandoned their horses and went up the mountain were already in position. They shuttled through the bamboo forest and were only waiting for His Royal Highness to give the order to shoot the 3 people into hedgehogs. The world knew that the Beiliang cavalry only recognized the large flag with the word Su. The Beiliang generals only recognized the Liang King's tiger seal. The heavens were high and the emperor was far away. What's more, the son of heaven on the dragon throne seemed to have always trusted the last prince with a different surname. A few years ago, he even had the intention of betrothing Princess Sui Zhu to the eldest son of de Zhuguo. It should be known that even in the capital, there were anecdotes about His Highness the heir apparent. Some scholars in Liangdi who passed the imperial examinations unanimously mocked and ridiculed the heir apparent. When they talked about Su Fingnian with their colleagues or teachers, there were always countless jokes. The common people all over the world were worried that Princess Sui Zhu had entered the tiger's mouth. The high-ranking officials and dignitaries in the capital who were familiar with the situation in the palace were eagerly waiting for Su Fingnian to arrive in the capital and then be beaten to death by the princess who had the same temper as him. This Princess Sui Zhu, when did she not go out to play without tormenting dozens and dozens of her sons? Beside him was the powerful old Taoist priest who had been the leader of Wudong for 30 years. Behind him were 100 crossbowmen. As if he had great confidence, Su Fengnian lifted Xiu Dong and pointed at the three people. He laughed nastily and said, "You, little woman. You, Dongyue's homeless dog, man, and you, imitating a woman and putting powder on your face. You are neither a man nor a woman. The three of you, don't go down the mountain. Stay here obediently and work like cows and horses for Laozi. When you have cleaned up the vegetable garden, you will see if this prince is in a good mood. If I am in a good mood, you can go wherever you want. If I am in a bad mood, other than I will chop you up and feed you to the dogs. Leader Wang, are there dogs on this mountain?" The old Taoist priest looked down and turned a deaf ear. He did not want to get involved in this muddy water. In the bamboo forest, the bull-riding martial granduncle who was being held by the Bailiang crossbowman shouted, "His Royal Highness, there are a lot of wild dogs on the mountain. They howl very loudly at night. It is probably because they are not full." The old Taoist priest had a headache and sighed. This little junior brother, why did he blindly join in the fun? If he fanned the flames, he would accidentally burn down Wudong, which was not a human, completely. The beardless man flew into a rage. No one in the world dared to humiliate him like this to his face. The woman who had been given an unpleasant nickname for no reason tugged at the sleeve of the extremely angry man beside her. She asked a few questions in a low voice. The man's expression was rather helpless, but he answered truthfully. Her imposing manner suddenly fell to the bottom. She glared at Su Fingnian, but her words were still loud and carefree. "How much money can this broken vegetable garden be worth?" Su Fingnian laughed and said, "If I say it is worth 1,000 taels of gold, then it is worth 1,000 taels of gold." She flew into a rage out of humiliation. Her small chest that was wrapped in cloth trembled violently. She gritted her teeth and said, "Fine, 1,000 taels of gold it is." She raised her hand and threw a luminous pearl at Jiang Ni, who had been standing silently in the vegetable garden. "For you." Probably because she was angry at herself for showing weakness for the first time, she once again threw the female pearl in her hand with a sobbing tone and screamed, "All for you." She never thought that she would take the initiative to lower her body like the sun rises from the west. That girl who looked somewhat sloppy and had an even more rustic temperament. Not only did she not shed tears of gratitude, she instead had a straight face with a bit of disgust in her eyes. She bent down and picked up 2 luminous pearls that were stained with mud. With one in each hand, she threw it back. She used even more strength and almost hit Jiang Ni, who had a priceless body. Fortunately, the white-faced man caught the dragon pearls and phoenix eyes. To her, there was no reason to throw something and then get it back. She endured the heartache and gloomily ordered the attendants to destroy the pair of luminous pearls that she had played with since she was young. She glared at the girl who did not know what was good for her. "Do you want to die?" Jiang Ni calmly said, "I only want the vegetable garden." "You turn it back to the way it was just now." She repeated with a heavier tone, I only want the vegetable garden. Su Fengnian did not have time to appreciate Jiang Ni's words, which were extremely suitable to his taste. Seeing that the girl who was neither a man nor a woman was about to crush the luminous pearls, he hurriedly shouted shamelessly, "Wait, my maid doesn't know the value of the pearls. Give me that pair of pearls." The owner of the pearls and the maid Jiang and I spoke at the same time. "You want it?" "I don't know the value of the pearls." Su Fengnian answered the two princesses with a mischievous smile. "Little sparrow, of course I want the pearls. If you give it to me, then I'll forget about today's matter." "Little mud man, you don't say. This pair of pearls is slightly more valuable than you think." The foreign girl who was forced to use a vulgar nickname seemed to have caught something that could be used against her. She threw a look at the attendant beside her and said with a neurotic smile, "You want it? I won't give it to you." The two luminous pearls were immediately crushed into powder by the two fingers of the beardless man. Su Fengnian's face was full of regret. It was not that there were no such good things in the palace. On the contrary, there were quite a few of them. But wasn't it better to have more good things in the world? Jiang and I did not give up and said coldly, "Give me back my vegetable garden." The girl said with equal harshness, "With just you?" Jiang and I glanced at Su Fengnian like an outsider. Su Fengnian was somewhat helpless. This was Jiang and I, the little mud man, being a rascal. Killing him was a matter of heaven and earth. If something happened, it was reasonable for him to take responsibility. The well-dressed girl said sarcastically, "I've only heard of a golden house hiding a mistress. I've never heard of a thatched house hiding a mistress." Su Fengnian really cherishes you. Jiang Ni's mind was exquisite. She immediately exposed the last layer of paper. Cherishes. Not really. No matter how bad it is, it's still better than someone refusing to marry. The girl's face was blank. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." Jiang and I stretched out her hand and said, "Give me back my vegetable garden." This was already the fourth time. Princess and princess. Neither was willing to give an inch. Su Fengnian secretly felt that it was interesting. Why did the princess make things difficult for the princess? Chapter 49. Daily updates and the number of words that are not updated will be recorded in the top post of the book review section. This book says to work hard, it is definitely not empty words. The bull rider hid in the bamboo forest, biting a bamboo leaf in his mouth, squatting and watching the show. Speaking from the bottom of his heart, this young martial granduncle did not have any bad feelings towards His Royal Highness, especially after he went up the mountain to practice his blade. Every time he brought books to Wudong, there would be one or two good books that had nothing to do with martial arts. The scenery on the mountain was naturally good, otherwise it would not be called the glazed world by the ancients. Among the 5 great mountains of the world, for 1,000 years before the previous dynasty, Wudong had always been known as the Tai Mountain. The buildings on the mountain were connected to the heavens and connected to the earth. However, after looking at this scenery for more than 20 years, Hong Shixiang did not get tired of looking at it. He also always hoped to see some new people and new things. His Royal Highness said that this was called liking the new and not getting tired of the old. It was a good thing. The young martial granduncle was sincerely happy to see the old people and old things on the mountain. Not to mention that eldest senior brother was like a loving father. Senior brother Qin had read all the scriptures on the jade pillar, it was just that he was a little strict. Every time he dug out a forbidden book from the bottom of the mountain, he would sigh and sigh. He habitually walked like an ant in front of Hong Shixiang, circle after circle, at most 30 circles at a time. There was also senior brother Little Wang who practiced his sword in silence. His swordsmanship was extraordinary. Other people would rack their brains to practice sword moves and sword forms, especially in the Wu family sword tomb. They could not wait to use the moves to the extreme. However, senior brother Little Wang cultivated the will of the sword alone on the single plank bridge of swordsmanship. He was similar to the legendary powerful Dong Tai. He once saw with his own eyes that senior brother Little Wang stood on the huge rock of the Xixiang pond and used his sword qi to split the waterfall apart. There were also a few older senior brothers who had different personalities. They were all good people, with the demeanor of ancient alchemists. They were even more protective of Hong Xixiang. However, things got more interesting when His Royal Highness went up the mountain. Hong Xixiang looked at the tense situation outside the thatched cottage. He couldn't help but feel anxious for His Royal Highness. Of those fellows from the capital, other than the wealthy woman who was disguised as a man, the other two were not easy to deal with, especially the gloomy uncle who had exchanged a blow with De Shixiang. His internal energy cultivation was unfathomable. If it wasn't for the fact that De Shixiang had cultivated the rarely seen De Huang Ting Pass in 100 years, he wouldn't have been able to retreat so easily. The outside world only knew that the last pass in the cult was extremely difficult to break through, but they didn't know that it was even more difficult to break through the De Huang Ting Pass. The reason why the De Huang Ting Pass with extremely high seniority on Mount Longhu was mostly because they had cultivated the De Huang Ting Pass but couldn't come out of it. The delicate stalemate was easily broken by a man with a sword on his back who slowly walked over from the other side of the waterfall. Senior brother Little Wang, who was known as Wudong's #1 nerd. Little Wang Xixiang had already passed the age of 40, his appearance was lean and incomparably confident. On his back was a slender peachwood sword the color of purple copper. Named Shin Tuesday legend has it that the ancient immortals had once used this sword to kill a 1,000-year-old fox spirit that brought calamity to the country and people. The immortal energy and demonic energy coexisted on the sword, only people with great willpower would be able to wield it. The old Taoist Wang Zhonglo said warmly, "It's not good to fight on the mountain, why don't we all go to the Xiang Palace not far away and eat some vegetarian food?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Only when you're full will you have the strength to fight." The impatient woman whose appearance could only be considered average sneered, "It's not enough that the Wudong sect leader personally came to protect us, even the #1 swordsman on the mountain, Wang Xiaoping, came to watch the battle with a sword in hand. Wudong's hospitality is truly touching. I'll remember this kindness. The next time we meet, I'll definitely repay you with a great gift." Su Fengnian smiled heartlessly. "Listening to your words, little sparrow doesn't intend to tangle endlessly with your future husband, then I'll let these 100 crossbow-wielding soldiers escort you down the mountain. When you reach the foot of the mountain, I'll call for 200 or 300 cavalry to escort you all the way out of the desert." She clenched her teeth and said, "Good," 3 times in a row. She was so angry that she laughed and said, "Good, good, good, I'll remember it all." "Su Fengnian, you just wait." Su Fengnian was just about to say something when Jiang and I interrupted. It was still inappropriate and did not understand the ways of the world. "Vegetable garden, compensate me." Su Fengnian angrily glared at Jiang and I. Jiang and I glared back at him. They stared at each other with murderous intent. But in the woman's eyes, they were flirting. With a cold snort, she ruthlessly stepped on the dirty muddy ground, as if she wanted to trample Wudong Mountain to the ground. Then she led her 2 attendants and swaggered away. On the way down the mountain, she repeatedly yelled that she was tired and stopped to rest. Without caring about her status, she sat on the flagstone and massaged her calves. When she was going up the mountain, she wholeheartedly wanted to beat the bones and scatter the ashes of her enemy, so she did not notice the pain in the soles of her feet. Now that she took off her boots and saw the shocking bloodstains, she burst into tears. She wailed loudly, full of energy, mournfully echoing on Wudong Mountain. The 2 attendants behind her did not dare to look directly at her. Although their status was high, they felt like they were walking on thin ice when facing this master. When they heard her cry, they became even more nervous and did not even dare to console her. The woman, whose family background was the most noble in the world, cried for a while before gradually quieting down. She braced herself and put on the exquisitely made boots. Wiping away her tears, she muttered to herself, "Sun Diao Temple, you can't beat Wang Zhonglo, and Zhang Huan can't beat Wang Xiaoping." Alas, if I had known, I would have brought more palace experts. Only the top eunuchs in the palace would be called Diao Temple or eunuch. There were only 8 or 9 of them in the dynasty. Seeing these eunuch leaders who were naked and did not have a beard, even the vassal kings who had a close personal relationship with His Majesty, or some influential ministers who held great power, would pinch their noses and take a detour. Those who had a good relationship with the eunuchs might even take the initiative to say a few polite words. In the establishment of the Liang dynasty, there were 13 stone tablets set up in a hole. It clearly stated that the eunuchs were not allowed to interfere in politics and were not allowed to go to the capital without permission. Since eunuch's son could leave the capital in plain clothes, the woman's identity was also revealed. Only the lawless Princess Sui Zhu could have such a heaven-defying treatment and make the current emperor turn a blind eye. Eunuch's son had been humiliated by His Royal Highness on Wudong Mountain today. He had already thought of 100 ways to make things difficult for lame Su when he returned to the capital. It was fine if he could not topple the deep-rooted Su family, but it would be good if he could discuss the Great Pillar State thousands of miles away from the capital. A towering tree. A towering tree. As high as the emperor. Eunuch's son sneered in his heart. Princess Sui Zhu, who had lost a pair of beloved luminous pearls, looked up and said fiercely, "Zhang Huan, I know you are going to write a secret report to my father. Just write that Su Fengnian has been hiding his strength and biding his time these years. His playboy behavior is all a disguise. This crown prince has monstrous ambitions. After meeting me in Liangdi, he treated me very warmly." The prince of the former dynasty of the fallen Dongwu was stunned. He did not know whether to agree or not. If he did not agree, he would not be able to get through this hurdle. If he agreed, he would be guilty of deceiving the emperor. The Dongwu royal family had already withered and there were only a few people left. Chapter 50. Sun Diao Temple solved the problem and said in a shrill voice, "Your Highness, the country's affairs are not to be trifled with. If we report the truth, His Majesty will definitely stand up for Your Highness. If His Majesty mistakenly believes that Su Fengnian is really ambitious, won't he be more determined to become in-laws with lame Su? What will happen to Your Highness then?" She thought about it seriously and frowned. "Yes, then I will be greatly embarrassed. Living with such an idiot, won't I be ridiculed by the world?" Eunuch's son and Zhang Huan looked at each other tacitly and saw that the other was relieved. The two who did not see eye to eye with each other had a tacit understanding after this trip to Wudong. Princess Sui Zhu limped down the mountain and asked softly, "Sun Diao Temple, what do you think of this Su Fengnian?" Eunuch's son sneered, "He is unscrupulous to the extreme. I used to think that the rumors in the capital were exaggerated, but after coming to Liangdi, which province and which county is not scolding him? Seeing him with my own eyes today, it is even more so." Princess Sui Zhu's thoughts were complicated. She lowered her voice and said, "Zhang Huan, is he good at using knives? He even made you use your knives." The old royal family of Dongwu laughed. "If we really want to kill him, 10 moves with a Baodiang knife is enough." The princess made an "oh" sound and scolded Su idiot, but did not say anything else. Behind them, 100 Bailiang soldiers were watching them from afar. On the mountain, the old Taoist priest left with his junior apprentice brother Wang Xiaoping. Before leaving, he gave Su Fengnian a bottle of elixirs. Hong Shixiang went to lead the green ox. Only Su Fengnian was left standing at the edge of the messy vegetable garden, looking at Jiang Ni, who was in a daze. His Royal Highness laughed, "If she doesn't want to compensate, I will compensate you." Jiang Ni squatted on the ground and gently lifted a seedling without saying anything. Su Fengnian followed and squatted down. He wanted to help but was pushed away by Jiang Ni and fell on his butt. She suspiciously raised her head and saw that even though Su Fengnian was covering his mouth, his fingers were still bleeding. He didn't seem to want Jiang Ni to see such a miserable scene. He suddenly stood up and left the garden. Su Fengnian, whose internal injuries were not light, swallowed a fragrant dark green pill in a small cave inside the waterfall, slowly recuperating his chi. In fact, he was not seriously injured when he fought with the Black Panther Party swordsman. It was only an external wound on his hand. This was not a problem for Su Fengnian. After all, he had been practicing the saber for half a year. It was just that, unsurprisingly, the head eunuch of the palace who made the move that was the most lethal. If Wang Zhongluo hadn't blocked most of it, Su Fengnian wouldn't have been able to crawl back, much less stagger his way here. After practicing the saber, Su Fengnian placed the most emphasis on breathing. Without a teacher, he circulated the qi and blood in his body through a few small Kunlun mountains. He felt slightly better. When he opened his eyes, he saw Hong Shixiang, who had brought some vegetarian food over. The young Grand Marshal uncle said softly, "You're a good person." Su Fengnian shook his head and laughed, "She's my servant. If I want to hit, scold, and tease her, that's my law. What's wrong with other people bullying her? Slapping her, isn't that the same as slapping my face?" The bull-riding man sighed, "I don't understand these things." Su Fengnian mocked, "You only know sh*t." The man who brought the food over out of goodwill did not refute. Last time, His Royal Highness went up the mountain to beat him up. First, he didn't hit his face, and second, he didn't hit his bird. Hong Shixiang, who was content, was glad. He suddenly thought of something and asked carefully, "Is that girl really the Princess Sui Zhu that you rejected?" Su Fengnian laughed coldly, "You know all about it." The young Grand Marshal uncle who didn't look like a Taoist master laughed foolishly. "I heard the little Taoist and the pilgrims talk about some things that happened at the foot of the mountain." Su Fengnian leaned against the wall, his slender fingers stroking the simple embroidered scabbard. He changed the topic and said calmly, "Back then, the old emperor wanted to overturn the forbidden Jianghu by force. He wanted all the martial artists in the country to willingly kneel at the feet of the emperor and be obedient dogs. However, some of the vassal kings said that they were sick. Some of them said that it was inappropriate, and some of them said that it was righteous or because of benefits. The generals were also unwilling to be evil people. In the end, who was the one who carried the world's infamy? It was Su Shao. That damned cripple had just destroyed Western Shu. With the Su banner, he targeted all the martial artists in the world. Among them, there were many Bailiang soldiers, especially the family roots of some of the generals. At that time, the morale of the army was more chaotic than any other time. Before the Bailiang army even started the war, there were already 20,000 veteran soldiers who resigned and returned home. There were also countless fierce generals from Jianghu who resented Su Shao and transferred to other armies. Did Su Shao ever complain? Hong Shixiang didn't find it strange that His Royal Highness called his father Lame Su. He heard that His Royal Highness would even use a broom to hunt down the Great Pillar State. The young Grand Marshal uncle didn't understand the things that happened at the foot of the mountain, let alone this strange father and son. Su Fengnian calmly said, "Later on, the current emperor was dissatisfied with the Shangyin Academy. The academy said that Western Shu couldn't be destroyed because it would harm the dynasty's fortune. The academy also said that the royal family of Western Shu had to be treated well, otherwise it would disappoint the scholars of the world. What could His Majesty do? In the end, he still let Su Shao take the lead. In a spurt of energy, he destroyed Western Shu in just 2 months. As for the royal family of Western Shu, who had won the hearts of the people, even the old emperor was stabbed to death by Su Shao. Nearly 100 members of the royal family were hanged on the city wall. Almost everyone in Western Shu was wiped out. As a result, the emperor could sleep soundly. Let's not talk about how Su Shao has been these years. Even I, a dandy who at most brought disaster to the young ladies of cold lands, was assassinated countless times. If I wasn't lucky, I would have died long ago. Jiang Ni is like this, I can accept it. She's just a little girl who lost her parents when she was only 5 years old. If she wants to make things difficult for me, it's reasonable. But there are so many old foxes who have lived for several decades or even 60 years. How could they be so unreasonable? Dragging a group of young talents who were cultivated with great difficulty to be buried with you. Isn't it good to live well? Su Fengnian's expression became surprisingly gentle. He softly said, "It's good to die, I can accompany my mother." The bull rider didn't dare to say anything, afraid that he would be slapped in the face. Su Fengnian regained his composure and said, "You might not believe it, but I held a saber when I was 6 years old and killed people when I was 9 years old. At that time, my wish was to be the #1 martial art master in the world, to ride the fiercest horse, to use the fastest and biggest saber. When I saw injustice on the road, would draw my saber to help. In the future, I would marry a woman who was as gentle and kind as my mother. What does Beiliang's hundreds of thousands of armored cavalry have to do with me? But after I grew up, I realized that many things can't be done as you wish. Many people, when you tried to reason with them, they would not listen to reason. So when Su Xiao told me not to touch a saber for 10 years and then to travel for 3 years after 10 years, I did it. Last year, old Huang, who was missing his front teeth, died. I didn't ask Su Xiao if this was because he wanted old Huang to die on top of the martial emperor city wall. I didn't dare to ask. Today, I practice the saber. In the future, I practice the sword. Even if I can't master it well or give up halfway, I will still." The young martial granduncle broke out in a cold sweat and kept quiet out of fear. Su Fengnian leaned his head against the stone wall and didn't speak his final thoughts. He only looked at the luminous pearl on the other side of the wall and said self-mockingly, "You asked my sister to live a better life in Jiangnan. If she's not happy, I won't be polite to you. I learned this from everyone in the world." Hong Shixiang said with a bitter face, "But I can't be more reasonable than anyone else." Su Fengnian remembered that during his 3 years of travel, by the banks of the Luo River, he saw a graceful figure in the distance. He said in a daze, "The lovesickness saber is best at killing people." Hong Shixiang was just about to flatter him and say that His Royal Highness' words were very knowledgeable and particular, but Su Fengnian saw this coming and said, "Shut up." Chapter 51. Su Fengnian told the bull rider to shut his mouth. He was just about to have this fellow go to the thatched cottage and bring some paper over. His experience on the mountain required him to write a letter to Su Xiao. If the golden princess Sui Zhu had come to Beiliang and Wudong out of childishness, then there was no need to be overly concerned. It was just a matter of old enmity adding to new hatred. Su Fengnian had plenty of lice and was not afraid of an itch. In any case, he most likely would not go to that majestic and imposing capital city in his lifetime. But if it was someone or a small group of people who instigated it, then he could not let his guard down. Don't look at how Su Xiao was an extremely high official with boundless glory. Who knows when dark clouds would descend on the city? When dealing with people, there were 2 kinds of people most afraid. One was extremely intelligent, and the other was self-righteous idiots. And in Beiliang, these 2 kinds of people were the most common. Su Fengnian was just about to order this martial granduncle of his, when a strange phenomenon occurred. The huge waterfall that was cascading downward suddenly exploded. The waves were like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins. Su Fengnian and Hong Shixiang both became drowned rats. Su Fengnian did not care about this splash of water. He stared fixedly at the scene on the huge rock in the middle of the white elephant pond outside the waterfall. In the blink of an eye, he could vaguely see the sword maniac Wang Xiaoping, whose seniority in Wudong was as high as the sect leader. He stood proudly, the peachwood sword in his hand pointed straight into the cave. This sword was incomparably domineering, giving His Royal Highness a show of strength. Wang Xiaoping, who had been silent for more than 10 years, really did not say anything. He floated away, coming and going in an unrestrained manner. Just like Su Fengnian when he was traveling in exile, he probably liked this kind of young chivalrous hero. His nose was up in the sky, arrogant beyond belief. Even when crossing a river, he did not want to sit on a small boat and instead wanted to float on the water. The problem was, if you float, you can float, but don't splash the water and let the common people on the boat be covered in water. If His Royal Highness were to bump into them, not to mention cheering and rewarding them, he would definitely drag these bastards out and beat them up. He would soak them in water for a few months and see if they still dared to show off in the future. The baffled Su Fengnian glared at Hong Shixiang, who was implicated. The latter said innocently, "Junior brother Wang was born in the year of the ox, that's why he has such a stubborn temper. He used to practice his sword here, so he's probably a little annoyed." His Royal Highness was magnanimous enough to not lower himself to senior brother Wang's level. His Royal Highness will become the #1 saber master in the future, and he will become the #1 saber master in the world. He will become a legend in Wudong. Su Fengnian ordered unhappily, "Go to the hut and get me some paper and ink." Hong Shixiang eagerly ran off to carry the things. Su Fengnian opened the food box. He had just picked up the bowl and was about to use the chopsticks to pick up a mouthful of dried bamboo shoots and vegetables when he spat out a mouthful of blood into the bowl. The red and white mixed together. Su Fengnian exhaled a long breath. Wudong's medicinal pills were indeed extraordinary. After spitting out the blood, his qi and meridians were much more comfortable. Su Fengnian expressionlessly swallowed the bowl of rice, chewing it carefully and swallowing it slowly. After finishing the bowl, what he ate was not the food that Hong Shixiang brought, but Jiang and I, who had never set foot on the hanging Immortal cliff before. In her hand was an ancient inkstone and several pieces of green sandalwood paper. The origin of the palm-sized ancient inkstone was frightening. In West Chu, there was a man who did not love the country nor did he love beauties, but only loved brush and ink. He was Jiang Ni's imperial uncle. This ancient inkstone was ranked second among the ancient inkstones in the world by him. It was the best quality fire clay inkstone. Its quality was outstanding. It was warm in the winter but did not freeze, cool in the summer but did not wither. It could accumulate for several years without rotting. Even though Jiang Ni was a country's imperial uncle, he was still reluctant to use it. When it fell into Su Fengnian's hands, he would use it every 10 days. Seeing ginger mud, Su Fengnian still had her grind the ancient inkstone. He picked out the best Guangdong Liaowei, and waited patiently for the ink to become uniform under Princess Taiping's delicate hands, until it glowed with the unique reddish hue of clay. Only then did he pick up the brush and start writing. Today, after meeting with Princess Sui Zhu, he wrote down everything, no matter how big or small. Su Fengnian Xiaojie was the most outstanding. The ancients said that learning to read a book must be done first to learn the regular script. The big script was based on the facial bones and willow tendons. The regular script was based on the Ouyang script. Finally, it was reduced to the mosquito regular script, imitating the Zhongwang. This was an ancient teaching. Most of the scholars in the world followed this order step by step. However, under Li Yishan's guidance, Su Fengnian did the opposite. Learning Xiaojie, he followed the Xiaozhuan ancient script. If he could not write Xiaojie well, he was not allowed to touch other things. As soon as he was discovered, he would be beaten with a green gourd wine pot. Among the contemporary calligraphers, only an old monk from the 2 Zen temples, who was addicted to wine as if it was his life, could enter Li Yishan's discerning eyes. He was said to be, when this monk is drunk, there is only Vidra's glaring eyes, there is absolutely no bodhisattva's lowering eyebrows. Therefore, His Royal Highness calligraphy carried a rare charm, full of murderous aura. Speaking of which, of Su Zhao's 2 daughters and 2 sons, only Su Fengnian's calligraphy was presentable. Needless to say, Su Longxiang did not know a single word of Duda. Su Zhihu could be considered mediocre. Even the amazingly talented Su Weisheng was pitiful. His poetry and literature could be said to be the best in the world. Only this word, even Su Xiao could not be thick-skinned enough to say that it was good. Su Weisheng's letters back home to Beiliang were few and far between. Perhaps this was the reason. Su Fengnian blew dry the last few drops of ink and folded the letter. Who would deliver the letter became a problem. He did not want this secret letter to fall into the hands of a Wudong Taoist priest. But the people of Beiliang Palace next to him were the last of the imperial bloodline of West Chu. Not to mention the distance between him and the trusted direct line of descent, his thin and weak body was also not suitable to deliver a letter. It was hard to guarantee that there were no deranged death warriors or assassins waiting around Wudong endlessly. The Beiliang soldiers at the foot of the mountain were escorting Princess Sui Zhu and the other 3 people away. Could it be that he had to call several Wudong masters to make a trip there? Su Fengnian lamented. Fine, he used his final trump card. He went out and chopped a small section of green bamboo with embroidery and stuffed the letter into it. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled, summoning the blue and white Luan from the top of Wudong Mountain. He tied a piece of cloth to its claws and the 6-year-old phoenix flapped its wings and flew away, disappearing in an instant. Su Fengnian came to the edge of the white elephant pond and looked at the sparkling water in the pond. He also looked at the breathtaking huge rock that looked like a dragon's horn. Jiang and I, who had been standing behind Su Fengnian all this time, said firmly, "I want to go down the mountain." Su Fengnian frowned and said, "You don't even want to take care of the vegetable garden. Are you going to let that little garden be abandoned?" She repeated in an old-fashioned manner, "I want to go down the mountain." Su Fengnian said angrily, "Let's make this clear first. The moment you go down the mountain, I'll flatten it." Unexpectedly, Jiang and I was not moved at all. "Up to you." Su Fengnian was completely at his wits' end. His heart was moved. He laughed and said, "If you want to go down the mountain, then go down the mountain. Your feet are on your body. I can't tie you up. But before you go down the mountain, come with me to do something. In return, I'll give you the fire clay inkstone in your hand. How about it?" Chapter 52. Without another word, Jiang and I threw the inkstone in her hand into the white elephant pond. She didn't want this ancient inkstone to be ruined by the guy in front of her. The reason why she cared so much about it was that it had become a demon in her heart. Not only was it a relic of West Chu's former glory, but there was also a secret that she had hidden very deeply. In Beiliang Palace, there were only 2 people she dared to express her hatred for. Other than Su Fengnian, who was ranked first, there was also that Su Weisheng who was flawless except for his handwriting and appearance. That year, when she tried to assassinate His Royal Highness in bed, she failed. Su Fengnian only gave her a slap on the face and said a few harsh words, but Su Weisheng came back from Shangyin Academy thousands of miles away and threw her into the well. The well water wasn't as high as a person, it couldn't drown anyone, but it was dark without daylight. Moreover, the most vicious woman in the world added frost on top of frost and covered her with a slate, making her stay at the bottom of the well for 3 days and 3 nights. After she came out of the well, she accidentally learned that Su Weisheng's calligraphy was terrible. Jiang and I began to practice hard on her own. She didn't have a brush or an inkstone, it was fine. She used a branch as a brush, rainwater, snow, and all kinds of water without roots could be used as ink. Her memory of copying before she was 5 years old had long been blurred. Later on, Jiang and I only cared about venting her emotions. She could write numbers with 1 stroke. Often, the writing on the ground was strange and abnormal, contrary to the current calligraphy style. Su Fengnian looked at the sky and said, "I'll call you at night." Jiang and I didn't ask anything. She went to the hut and squatted down to look at the vegetable garden for the last time. It could be seen that although she was stubborn, she was still reluctant to leave. Su Fengnian shouted, "The one who rides the bull, get out here." The young Shishu really came out. Su Fengnian was used to this bird man's appearance and disappearance. He said, "Go prepare some wine and meat, a large awl for writing on the board, if it's really not enough, a broom is fine, and a bucket of ink. Go now. Hong Shixiang was puzzled, what is His Royal Highness doing? Su Fengnian laughed, practicing calligraphy. Hong Shixiang said in panic, don't tell me he's going to write on the wall of Xiang Monastery. Su Fengnian comforted him, how could I do such a tasteless thing? Hong Shixiang said uncertainly, really? Su Fengnian gave him the word scram. Apart from praying for his own good fortune, Hong Shixiang also prayed for Purple Sun Temple. This His Royal Highness better not cause any trouble. Which of the 100 or so Taoist priests of Xiang Monastery wasn't living in fear these days? It was said that the Taoist priest couldn't sleep well every night. Every day, he would go to the eldest senior brother's place to complain, pleading for the devil incarnate who was stirring up trouble at some unknown time to be invited to another place. Su Fengnian waited for an hour. When Hong Shixiang brought the things over, he returned to the waterfall to rest. The bull rider brought a pot of fragrant rice wine, 2 pounds of cooked beef, a giant awl half the height of a person and a barrel of ink. It was very complete. Su Fengnian really didn't know what this bull rider was doing every day. If he wasn't running errands and delivering food, he would be sitting by the waterside in a daze. If not, he would be herding cows and riding cows. How did he cultivate the way of heaven? If cultivating the way of heaven was so comfortable and easy, Su Fengnian would want to go and cultivate it. The 15th day of the month was a full moon. With such a large silver plate hanging in the sky, there was no need to carry a lantern when walking at night. Su Fengnian originally wanted to use a night pearl to illuminate the way, but there was no need for that. He called Jiang Ni, who had been staying in the vegetable garden like a clay figurine, and walked towards the peak of the mountain. Xiang Monastery had avoided a calamity, but the pitiful Taishu Temple, the first of Wudong's 36 palaces, was about to suffer. The night is like a worm, the mountain is like a crouching cow. The bright moon is like a cocoon, it wraps me in Jiang Ni. Su Fengnian's poetic spirit was greatly aroused. He improvised a lame 5-character poem with an uneven rhythm and was immensely proud of himself. This poem is superb. Little clay figurine, what do you think of the moaning poems of the scholars of Liangzhou? Almost all of the heavy objects were carried by her. Jiang Ni, who was on her back, didn't even have the time to change her expression. Su Fengnian brought Jiang Ni up the steps, heading straight for the Taishu Temple at the peak of Big Lotus Peak. There was a white jade plaza, the most suitable place to write and paint. Which scholar would dare to use a large awl to write the characters fighting in front of Wudong's Taishu Temple? Only His Royal Highness. This was a true hedonist. In an evil village, he only knew how to bully men and tyrannize women, climbing walls and looking at red apricots. He was too petty. Arriving in front of the Taishu Temple, the mountain breeze brushed against his face, cooling his body. Su Fengnian had Jiang Ni place the things on the steps. He tore off a piece of beef and sat down, thinking about how to write. Regular script, running script, or the cursive script that he secretly practiced. Should it be the Futu Temple monolith, Huangzhou cold food calligraphy, or urgent calligraphy? Compared to regular script, Su Fengnian was actually more fond of cursive script, unrestrained and unrestrained. However, Li Shan said that his skill was not enough and that he was far from the level where success would follow naturally. He did not allow His Royal Highness to touch it, which was a regrettable matter. The roof of the Taishu Temple's main hall was paved with peacock blue glazed tiles. The 3 ridges hung down from the roof, with yellow and green as the main hall's decorative carvings. The large eaves were flying upwards, the world-famous Beijing corner eaves. Su Fengnian got up and picked up the large awl and dipped it into the water bucket. He shook it a bit but still couldn't think of what to write. When it was time to write, he regretted not having enough books, but when it was time to write, he regretted being lazy. The ancients did not deceive him. Su Fengnian held the large brush and sighed again and again. In the end, he decided to drink a few mouthfuls of wine. Perhaps he could write something good with the wine. When he turned around, he was stunned. Jiang Yan'ai had already raised her head and gulped down a large mouthful of wine. She, who had never drunk wine before, immediately flushed red, just like the peach blossoms in the West Chu palace. It was rumored that the West Chu emperor doted on Princess Taiping to the extreme. The little princess asked the peach blossoms in the courtyard how heavy they were. Su Fengnian sighed quietly and dipped the large brush into the ink bucket. Today, he wanted to see her calligraphy. Although the present world's cursive script was far from Li Chao, it was still what his master Li Yishan called Zhang Chao. It was far from Li Yishan's realm of removing all rules, writing until the end is illiterate. There were only a few people in the world, such as the strange monk in the two Zen temples, who could be like what scholar Li Yishan said, joys and sorrows, riches and honor, poverty, yearning, intoxication, injustice, resentment, only when the heart moves and the words become one with heaven and earth. Jiang Yan'ai walked shakily towards the large ink bucket. After holding it with both hands, she walked to the center of the square and began to write. At that time, Su Fengnian knew that when she smiled, the scenery was moving. When she was sad and wanted to cry but did not cry, it was even more moving. The brush in her arms moved like a dragon. It was as if there was a ghost at the tip of the brush. The large brush had 245 characters. One stroke often had 5 or 6 characters. It started with West Shuiyue, mountains and rivers die. East Yu, mountains and rivers die. At the head of the river, the people suffer. At the end of the river, the people suffer. It ended with, Jiang Yan'ai swears to kill Su Fengnian. She held the large brush and sat near the character, Nian. Her body was covered in ink. She was lost in thought and tears streamed down her face. Su Fengnian sat on the highest step and muttered to himself, what a good, great gunghorn swearing to kill under the moon. Chapter 53. That night, Jiang Yan'ai, who was no longer West Chu's Princess Taiping, went down the mountain alone. Su Fengnian did not fly into a rage out of humiliation and destroy her rebellious cursive script. He just lay on the stone steps, drank half a pot of rice wine, ate all the beef, and waited for the east to turn white before leaving Taishu Temple. That day, Su Fengnian was still diligently practicing his blade. A clumsy bird always flies backward, always suffering a little. After dawn, the little boy sweeping the floor saw the scribbled words on the square and was shocked. He thought that an immortal had descended to the mortal world to write a heavenly book. He threw away his broom and ran back to the hall to call for his master. After his master read it, he called for his master again. Finally, the 6 most senior martial grandmasters of Wudong were all gathered. The only person in the world to have completed the Great Yellow Court Pass in the last 60 years was the sect leader Wang Zhongluo. Chen Yao, who was in charge of Wudong's moral precepts, was inflexible but not inflexible. He was over 90 years old, but his body was still healthy. He loved to walk in circles and reprimand the most talented disciple on the mountain. Before he finished scolding, he would begin to feel sorry for him. Song Jiming, who had lived for 2 centuries and was a full 140 years old, appeared to be the lowest in seniority. He had already come out of the last prison pass 7 or 8 times. If he wasn't the first in the world, then he would be the second. At the same time, he was in charge of refining external elixirs. Wudong had nearly 100 elixirs, most of which came from his hands. Yu Xingrui, who had just returned from his travels in the Eastern Sea, was dressed sloppily. His inner strength was vigorous, second only to Wang Zhongluo. He had just reached 60 years old and had taken in a disciple with an exceptionally good constitution. The child was not even 20 years old. Wudong's seniority often had nothing to do with age. The sword maniac Wang Xiaoping, who was even more mute than a mute, was like an ancient well without ripples. It was as if he had no other concerns in his life besides the sword. In addition, the last person on Wudong Mountain was probably the one who did not do proper work and only pursued the illusory heavenly Tao, Hong Shixiang. Good writing. Chen Yao praised from the bottom of his heart. Excellent. Yu Xingrui nodded in agreement. Good writing is good. Apart from the 7 words at the end, this Dexiong is filled with grief and indignation, yet unyielding. This is the first time I have seen something like this. Song Jiming, who was twice the age of an average person, sighed heavily. He bent his waist and stood at the beginning of the book, studying it carefully. Twirling his vine-like white eyebrows with one hand, he exclaimed in surprise, "Come to think of it, it seems that the seemingly redundant 7 words at the end are the finishing touches. What a great oath of death. Good calligraphy. Compared to the current cursive script, it's even more boundless and unrestrained. The dragon leaps over the heavenly gate and the tiger crouches on the mountain. What's more, it's a good piece of writing. It's hard to imagine that it came from a girl who's not even 20 years old." Wang Zhongluo's words sealed the coffin. "Shoo, shoo, shoo. Be softer," Junior Granduncle said nervously. "What's there to be afraid of? His Royal Highness is practicing his swordsmanship down there," Wang Zhongluo teased. "In any case, I'll be the only unlucky one when the time comes." Hong Shixiang muttered. "It's easy to get along with young people." "We're all old," Wang Zhongluo said with a smile. "Eldest senior brother, just because I'm young, you're pushing me into the fire pit," Hong Shixiang said with grief and indignation. "Junior brother, you have to understand that if I don't enter hell, who will? The heavenly Tao is nothing more than this." Wang Zhongluo laughed. In front of his junior brothers, how could he have the demeanor of a transcendent Taoist immortal? Bullshit. That's Buddhist language. Hong Shixiang shouted. 10,000 streams flow from the east into the sea. The words are different, but the logic is the same. Yu Xingrui laughed, adding insult to injury. Did you hear that? Your senior brother Yu's words are reasonable. Wang Zhongluo patted his junior brother's shoulder, then exchanged a smile with Yu Xingrui. They were all old and had no hope of immortalization. The greatest joy they had was to tease their junior brother a little. Who knew when they would be lying in a coffin, so they would say as many words as they could. Wang Zhongluo said, "Junior brother, your calligraphy is the best here. Take advantage of the clear weather and copy it. Place it on the top floor of the sutra depository and store it carefully." Hong Shixiang rolled his eyes. "If I don't write it, if His Royal Highness finds out, I'll lose a layer of skin." Wang Zhongluo laughed. "At most, you won't copy the last 7 words. What's there to be afraid of?" Hong Shixiang muttered, "In any case, the one who gets beaten up won't be eldest senior brother." Wang Xiaoping, who had not spoken for 16 years, stood still for a long time. Finally, he said hoarsely, "There's sword intent in the words." The 4 older senior brothers looked at each other, then they all smiled knowingly. Hong Shixiang, who had not heard his 6th senior brother speak ever since he came up the mountain, said in despair, "I'll write it." 3 days later, thunder boomed loudly. Su Fingyan came to the Great Void Temple again with an oil paper umbrella. After the rain, there was only darkness on the ground. The rain gradually became heavier. The raindrops poured down on the umbrella and made a pitter-patter sound. He saw a thin figure carrying a peachwood sword come to the square and stand in the other corner. Su Fingyan did not know if the white-haired old man had left Bailiang Palace or not. Otherwise, he could have called him over to fight with this sword maniac. After the life-or-death battle with the Donghua swordsman, it was different to watch experts fight. It was no longer just a show. Dispelling this tempting idea, Su Fingyan turned and went down the mountain. Outside the thatched cottage, Wudong Garden's first-class maid, Blue Bird, stood in the thunderstorm. She held an oil paper umbrella with a blue wand painted on it, quietly waiting for His Royal Highness. Blue Bird brought with her a letter that de Zhuge had personally handed to her. Su Fengnian walked into the room that was filled with secret manuals and almost had no place to stand. The bed, table, and chairs had already been piled up. There was only a clean space in the corner. Unsurprisingly, that was where Jiang and I slept. Su Fengnian sat on a pile of books. He tore a few pages from the Tiger Cage Saber to wipe his face, and then tore a few pages to wipe the rain off his hands. Only then did he open the letter. In the letter, Su Xiao wrote that he had already sent people to the capital to gather information. He did not hide anything. He had begun to prepare to invite a bodhisattva to suppress Eunuch Sunday. In 2 years, he would make Eunuch's son lose his power. What really stunned Su Fengnian was that Su Xiao had finally uncovered the mystery. Why did he want him to come to Wudong? He wanted Wang Zhongluo to transfer his mystic understanding cultivation to him. This was a shady business that defied the heavens. Was he not afraid of being struck by lightning? Su Fengnian destroyed the secret letter. His heart was in turmoil. He raised his head to look at Blue Bird, who was standing at the door, and asked, "Can internal energy be transferred to others? If so, as long as one passes on one's internal energy before death, won't the experts of the sects and large sects become stronger with each generation?" Blue Bird said calmly, "The effects of a pill or a bowl of rice vary from person to person. The amount of internal energy transferred is at most half. There was once a devil in Jianghu. His internal energy was profound. He liked to forcefully transfer internal energy to others. He saw with his own eyes how those people's bodies could not bear the burden. In the end, their limbs exploded and they died. Only a complete head was left." Su Fengnian was dumbfounded. "There's such a madman who harms others without benefiting himself." Blue Bird nodded. Su Fengnian asked, "Do you think this is Su Zhao's idea, or my master's?" Blue Bird replied honestly, "I don't dare to say." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Then it must be Su Xiao." Chapter 54. Blue Bird looked around and unexpectedly smiled. Su Fengnian said softly, "Wait for the rain to lessen before you go down the mountain." Blue Bird made a sound of agreement. Blue Bird still had to go down the mountain in the end. Su Fengnian accompanied her to the Black Tortoise Dongxing Memorial Arch before turning around. Returning to the thatched cottage, Su Fengnian looked at the muddy vegetable garden and chuckled. "If you hate me, why do you have to write it down? If second sister finds out, won't you be looking for a beating again? Girl, you don't remember a good beating." Following that, His Royal Highness continued to immerse himself in practicing his blade. However, he began to boldly go to the purple bamboo forest on Big Lotus Peak to look for trouble. It must be known that that was the forbidden area of the founder, Wang Xiaoping. Few of the same generation as this sword maniac on Wudong Mountain dared to disturb him. Only the young martial granduncle would go there to graze or find some suitable slender purple bamboo to make a fishing rod. The first time Su Fengnian went to the purple bamboo forest, he was forced out by a sword strike that cut through dozens of purple bamboo trees. The second time, he recklessly took a sword strike and ended up lying on a wooden plank bed for half a month, causing Wudong Mountain to take out a good bottle of high-grade pills. When Su Fengnian was able to split open a waterfall, he visited the purple bamboo forest again. However, after a sword strike, he was forced to withdraw. He still didn't see the sword maniac's face. However, he didn't immediately fall to the ground and couldn't get up. In any case, he was able to stagger back to the thatched cottage. Wudong Mountain and Mount Longhu were both of the Cauldron branch. Not only did they promote the cultivation of the dragon and tiger embryonic breathing technique, but they also accepted the external pills that Mount Longhu condemned as heretical. Qingyun Peak had several Qianjun cauldrons. The alchemists were the ones on the mountain who were most willing to endure hardships. Every year, they consumed nearly 10,000 caddies of charcoal. Su Fengnian once went to Qingyun Peak to observe the cauldron opening ceremony. It was said that apart from the main peak of Lotus Peak, this mountain was the most evil and inviolable. One had to choose an auspicious day to build an altar and burn talismans. The alchemists would kneel at the foot of the peak and pray to the heavenly sovereign of the great Tao. Only after the ceremony did they ascend the mountain. This finally made His Royal Highness understand that cultivating the Tao wasn't easy, and alchemy was even harder. However, this didn't stop Su Fengnian from eating pills like a cow chewing on peonies. This made Hong Shixiang, who had finally convinced his third martial brother Song Jiming to allow His Royal Highness to enter the mountain to watch the alchemy, extremely angry. He had no choice but to throw a flirtatious glance at this heartless blind man. Eldest martial brother had said that young people were easy to communicate with. This was completely unreasonable. The scent of osmanthus on the mountain was very fragrant. Other than competing with the waterfall at the foot of the Immortal hanging peak, Su Fengnian would occasionally go to the purple bamboo forest to fight with Wang Xiaoping. Finally, he was barely able to withstand one sword strike without falling. Although it was just one sword strike, whether or not Su Fengnian fell or not meant that Su Fengnian had reached a higher level in his saber practice. Probably because he suddenly discovered that the number of purple bamboos in the purple bamboo forest had suddenly decreased, the sword fanatic's next sword strike was even more unpredictable. Very few people could have predicted that the notorious His Royal Highness could really stay on Mount Wudong for half a year. Some of the young Taoists who had come into contact with the affairs of the mortal world were guessing whether or not His Royal Highness had hidden a dozen or so beautiful maids on the mountain, or whether or not His Royal Highness was feasting on fish and meat every day. At the same time, the number of times they saw their young martial granduncle decreased. Therefore, there were also young Taoists who spread rumors that His Royal Highness was the reincarnation of a devil and needed the reincarnation of Great Emperor Zhenwu's young martial granduncle to suppress him. The bull-riding Hong Shixiang turned a deaf ear to the rumors and did not take the initiative to explain anything. When he met a younger Taoist who was younger than him and asked such questions, he would answer with a smile, "His Royal Highness is reading the Cloud Bookcase 7 Lots and Daoist Ishu. He is very attentive." If it was someone else who said this, naturally no one would be willing to believe it. But when it came from the martial granduncle's mouth, it was still doubtful. Occasionally, a Taoist priest, whose seniority was neither low nor low, would ask with righteous indignation, "Hong Shu, that person surnamed Su did not want to be His Highness the heir apparent. Why did he come to Mount Wudong to abuse his power? Who is he practicing his blade for?" The young martial granduncle laughed and said, "Probably for him to practice his blade for himself. His Royal Highness is born rich and noble, his hobbies will always be different from ordinary people." He is indeed a bit different. There would always be people who couldn't help but sneer, "He must have secretly learned our Wudong's secret techniques and practiced his blade so that he can go down the mountain to commit evil." At this time, the young martial granduncle fell silent. Today, he had released the green ox and walked alone through the mountain forest towards the hanging coffin. He saw a Wudong Mountain's unique autumn cicada fly past his eyes. Hong Shixiang didn't seem to speed up his pace, but after walking a few steps like a drunkard, he caught up with the autumn cicada and gently pinched it, blocking it just before it crashed into a spider web. The young martial granduncle lowered his head and bent his waist as he walked past the spider web. Only then did he release his 2 fingers and release the autumn cicada. Actually, after this cicada evolved from a larva to an adult, its lifespan was at most 3 months. But Hong Shixiang still saved it, without any reason. He just did a small thing that couldn't be more natural. This martial granduncle who had been doing small things like this for more than 20 years on the mountain had always been regarded by everyone as the best candidate to comprehend the way of heaven. But it seemed that he himself didn't know what the way of heaven was, nor did he spend any effort to think deeply. He ate, drank, pooped, herded cows, read books, and enjoyed the scenery. Hong Shixiang slowly walked out of the thatched hut and saw His Royal Highness picking a cucumber from the vegetable garden and putting it in his mouth to chew on. Hong Shixiang wanted to steal a cucumber to taste while His Royal Highness wasn't paying attention, but Su Fingnian used the embroidered winter scabbard to slap away his claws. Hong Shixiang, who could only crouch on the side and watch curiously, asked, "His Royal Highness, is he really willing to part with the red and tender wine face, clear and beautiful singing voice, delicacies and brocade bedding of the prince's estate?" Su Fingnian laughed, saying, "If you did this every day for more than 10 years, you would also be willing." Hong Shixiang shook his head, saying, "I just can't bear to part with this mountain." Su Fingnian said disdainfully, "You're a coward, these are two different things." Hong Shixiang pursed his lips. This was the young martial granduncle's greatest protest. Su Fingnian said mockingly, "I even dare to go up the mountain to practice the blade, you don't dare to go down the mountain. Are there groups of demons and monsters at the foot of the mountain, or are there demons and monsters everywhere? Taking a step back, even if there are, don't we need you Taoists to slay demons and monsters?" Hong Shixiang still shook his head vigorously. Su Fingnian didn't waste any more saliva, asking, "I'm going to the purple bamboo forest, are you coming with me?" Hong Shixiang shook his head even more like a rattle drum, waving his hand, saying, "I'm not going. Even senior brother Wang won't let me go there to graze the cows anymore." Su Fingnian gnawed on a cucumber, carrying the winter embroidered blade as he left the little vegetable garden, saying vaguely, "What's so great about being number one in the world? It's better to be the only one in the world. Everyone is fighting for the title of number one in the world. In the end there's only one person, but the latter is something that everyone has a chance of attaining. This is the way of the heavens." Hong Shixiang squatted on the ground, his hand supporting his cheeks as he sank into deep thought. "I understand a little, but I don't understand a little." Su Fingnian, who was walking with his back facing Hong Shixiang, coldly snorted, "Don't steal cucumbers anymore, I've already counted them. If I find out that you're missing even one, I'll beat you until your 3 legs are covered in blood, do you understand?" Hong Shixiang squeezed out a smile, saying, "I understand very well." Chapter 55. Su Fingnian was just about to go to the mute sword maniac to learn about the so-called sword energy when he heard a pig-like wail that sounded like a pig being slaughtered, accompanied by a mournful cry that sounded like the death of one's parents. Su Fingnian turned around with a smile and saw a big meatball rolling and crawling over. He quickly used the winter embroidery scabbard to block the momentum of the meatball that weighed 150 kilograms. Only Chu Lushan, this fat weirdo, dared to act so shamelessly and seductively in front of His Royal Highness. Seeing the dark-skinned Su Fingnian, the fat man nicknamed Lu Qiu, struggled to squat at the feet of the crown prince with snot and tears. His white and fat hands held the winter embroidery scabbard as he sobbed. Su Fingnian liked to see Lu Qiu's exaggerated actions the most. He was happy every time he saw it. As for whether it was real or fake, as long as the Su royal banner didn't fall, it couldn't be any more real. Su Fingnian pulled out the scabbard and patted the dignified General Long Wu's cheeks. "Get up and talk. You're a third-rank secondary class general. I've never heard of you kneeling to your parents before me. However, I've heard that you vent your anger on your parents for no reason. By the way, Lu Qiu, have you finished the task that Su Xiao gave you?" Chu Lushan didn't bother to wipe off the buckets of sweat that he had crawled out of Wudong. He struggled to get up, the fat on his body trembling. He really didn't know how his maidservants and concubines could withstand the pressure of 150 kilograms of fat. The round fat ball smiled flatteringly and said, "It's almost done. There are people watching over the rest. There won't be any loopholes. Lu Qiu's parents are 2 disrespectful old people. They only gave birth to me and did a good deed. Why should I kneel? On the other hand, His Royal Highness is wise and powerful. He monopolizes the world and is talented. Today, he has achieved great success in his saber practice. He is a master of both the pen and the sword. He is willing to kneel to your highness even if he dies. Your highness, this mountain is really not a place for people to stay. Lu Qiu boldly invites your highness back to the mansion. Hey, Lu Qiu, went out to do some work this time and found a pair of lovely twin lotus flowers on one stalk in Gongnamdu for your highness. They are only in their prime, but they are as plump as a beautiful woman. Your highness, you can pick them. Su Fengnian's face was gloomy. Chu Lushan, who did not know how he had angered his royal highness, suddenly thought of the old servant with missing front teeth. Among the 9 sabers, sword 2 seemed to be called twin lotus flowers on one stalk. The fat man quickly slapped himself twice. He used a lot of strength and was not careless at all. His whole face was red as braised meat. He said regretfully, "This lowly one deserves to die." Su Fengnian put his arm around Chu Lushan's shoulder and laughed. "Look, the relationship between us brothers has become estranged, hasn't it? I was just trying to scare you, and you took it seriously. You deserve to be slapped." Lu Qiu nodded vigorously and slapped herself twice. The slapping sounds were unusually loud. She had definitely used all the strength she had last night to drink milk. Chu Lushan was notorious in Liangland. He had truly reached the level of innumerable crimes. One of them was that as long as he heard that a beautiful woman had given birth to a child, he would kidnap her and bring her to his mansion to drink milk. If the milk was good, the result would be good. After eating and drinking, she would be rewarded with silver tails. If the milk was bad, her breasts would be cut off. This kind of jackal had always been a dog in Liang Prince's mansion. But this dog had followed the Great Pillar State to the north and south. It had once carried Su Shao on the battlefield and blocked a full 11 swords. Therefore, when Su Shao was conferred the title of queen, he had promised his adopted son Chu Lushan that he could commit 11 capital crimes and not die. The other adopted sons had their own factions, but they all despised Chu Lushan. For example, Yuan Zhuozong had never looked at this fat man properly, let alone the butcher Chen Jibao, who had even said that he would light Lu Qiu's body up as a sky lantern in the future. Su Fengnian brought Chu Lushan to the elephant washing pool. It was immediately cool. Looking at Yuanqiu carefully squatting down and splashing some water on her face, Su Fengnian asked with a smile, "You didn't come all the way up the mountain just to howl a few times in front of me, right?" Chu Lushan raised his head and smiled. "There are some interesting news recently. I was afraid that your highness would be lonely on the mountain, so I wanted to tell you to relieve your boredom." Su Fengnian was interested. "Lu Qiu is still the warmest. Quickly tell me." Chu Lushan sat down on a stone and said with a smile of exultation, "The first is that a young genius swordsman named Wu Luding appeared in the Wu family's sword tomb. He left the sword tomb at the age of 20 and went down the mountain to challenge the world's famous swordsman. So far, he has not been defeated. He will soon reach the Yu King's sword pool. There will be a good show soon. This man surnamed Wu's swordsmanship is very good. He walked from the north to the south with a single sword. Although he has never fought with a level 1 master, there are 6 or 7 masters who died under his sword who have been famous for decades. However, Lu Qiu thinks that no matter how powerful his sword is, it is like an embroidery needle compared to your highness' saber." Su Fengnian smiled and did not comment. He signaled with his eyes for Lu Qiu to continue. Lu Qiu wiped the water droplets on his face that were warmed by his body temperature as soon as he came out of the pool. He continued, "The next 2 things are related to Second Commandery Princess. 2 years ago, Second Commandery Princess was the invigilator of the Shangyin Academy. She gave a 5-character quatrain to a scholar from Western Shu and said that it was unbearable to look at. The scholar was not convinced and asked who in the world could look good in poetry. Your Highness, do you know what Second Commandery Princess said?" Second Commandery Princess's comments almost angered all the literary and famous scholars in the dynasty. She commented that Song Qimen's poetry was dispirited and full of lewdness in the boudoir and the feelings of visiting prostitutes. She commented that Grand Secretary Yuan Jiang, Shen Haitang, Zhang Jiao and the like were weak in technique and thought, fishing for fame. Overall, their talent was not high and their interest was not high. They were far from being called great poets. She commented that the great poet of Shangyin Academy, Yan Jidao's short chapter, Shaoling, was pure music of nature and could not be seen through human effort. Even second commandery princess's teacher, Su Huang, did not escape the disaster. He was commented that he was full of emotion and less of reality. For example, although the beauty from a poor family was extremely beautiful, she lacked the bearing of wealth and honor. In the end, the scholar who was arrogant because of his talent was dumbfounded and had no more arrogance. He could only quietly ask the first CI deity, Li Fu-Zhen, what should he do? Who would have thought that second commandery princess still commented that the poem could only be read as unreadable, could not be called a poem and could not be sung. As for the rest of the people under Li Fu-Zhen, they could not even read it. Chu Lushan was panting as he spoke, but he was in high spirits. It was strange to say that Su Jihu, one of the two women of the Pillar State, hated Lu Qiu, to the core and wished that he could beat her to death. On the contrary, Su Weisheng, who had an outstanding reputation, did not have much dislike for this fatty. As for his younger brother, Su Fengnian, who was hanging out with Chu Lushan, he had never asked about it. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "This is great. The scholars in the world will be mad and stomping their feet." Lu Qiu laughed and said, "Your Highness is wise. Once this comment was out of the academy, the world will be full of curses. On this trip, I will chop off the 10 fingers of a guy who dared to write an article accusing second commandery princess of being arrogant and overconfident." Su Fengnian intentionally skipped this topic and asked, "The last one?" Chu Lushan's face was fierce. A young man came out of nowhere and ran to Shangyin Academy. He wanted to play chess with second commandery princess, saying that he wanted to learn from the ancients and play 10 rounds of chess. Su Fengnian was surprised. "My second sister agreed." Chu Lushan, whose eyebrows were full of murderous intent, sighed and said helplessly, "Second commandery princess agreed." They played 10 rounds in 10 days, 5 wins and 5 losses. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "I guess it's still the 12 chessboards and not the 19 that my second sister created?" Chu Lushan nodded. Su Fengnian understood and said, "This means that no matter how good that person is at chess, he is not qualified to play with my sister on the 19 chessboards." Chu Lushan, who was in the shape of Maitreya, withdrew his murderous intent and immediately became complacent. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "After hearing your words, I remember one thing. My second sister doesn't like me to practice the knife. I have to go down the mountain and flatter her." Lu Qiu's eyes narrowed into slits and she seemed to be very happy. Su Fengnian stood up and said, "I still have to practice the knife. When you go down the mountain, go to the vegetable garden and pick 2 cucumbers to try. Fatty like you can't live without meat. You can only live long if you eat vegetables occasionally." Chu Lushan hurriedly stood up, his face full of gratitude. Su Fengnian took off his clothes and placed the embroidered winter saber on the shore. He jumped into the deep pool like a fish. Chu Lushan picked 2 cucumbers, 1 in each hand, no more and no less. After walking for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, he met up with the imperial bodyguards and slowly went down the mountain. He went up the mountain by the main road that led to the Black Tortoise Dongxing Memorial Arch. When he went down the mountain, he chose the southern divine path, where pilgrims went up the mountain to offer incense. The path was more than 20 miles long, with peaks like bamboo shoots and rivers like silk. Chu Lushan was silent and even ate the bottom of the cucumber into his stomach. The imperial bodyguard commander was a strong general who killed people like scything flax. He had a good relationship with the master and servant of this adopted son of the Great Pillar State. He half-jokingly said that the general was in such a good mood that he was even interested in cucumbers. Chu Lushan didn't say anything and slapped him. The force was heavy and extremely vicious, knocking out several of the general's teeth. The general swallowed the blood and teeth in his stomach and knelt on the ground, trembling in fear. Lu Qiu, who was laughing at His Royal Highness's teasing and even slapping, was expressionless. She walked on the mountain path and didn't even look at the terrified commander. She only looked back at the towering lotus peak and said softly, "I'm really not suited to be on the mountain." Chapter 56. Su Fingnian found a large handful of pebbles at the bottom of the lake, threw them on the ground, and then jumped into the deep, bone-chilling lake. He repeated this process repeatedly, and in half a day, he had found more than 40 pebbles. He filtered out half of them and piled them in the cave behind the waterfall. After doing this strange thing, he took his saber and went to the bamboo forest. Although it was called the Purple Bamboo Forest, it was actually mixed with a lot of Phoebe bamboos and abacus bamboos. Tens of thousands of bamboos gathered together to form a sea of bamboos. When the wind blew, the bamboo billowed, full of vitality. Su Fingnian liked to come here to catch some bamboo chickens and zither-playing frogs to eat. There was no reason for him not to take advantage of the situation. He heard from the bull rider that when winter came, the winter bamboo shoots here were the most delicious. Su Fingnian did not know if he could survive until that day. Wudong's #1 idiot lived in a simple bamboo house in the depths of the sea of bamboos. When he practiced his sword, he liked to walk on the waves above the bamboo forest. The power of his sword was like a wave, truly irresistible. As soon as Su Fingnian entered the bamboo forest, he took out the embroidered winter, always on guard against that sword maniac Wang Xiaoping's inexplicable sword. But today, for some reason, even when Su Fingnian saw the bamboo house, Wang Xiaoping still had not made his move. Su Fingnian's clothes were already soaked through. No wonder His Royal Highness was walking on thin ice. That sword maniac was a real idiot. He did not care about Beiliang's 300,000-strong cavalry, did not care about the great pillar state Su Shao, and did not care about the 4-character memorial arch at the foot of Mount Wudong. In his heart, there was only the sword. Therefore, every time he only made one move, Su Fingnian had to concentrate all his energy and be careful to deal with it. Wang Xiaoping slowly walked out of the bamboo house and sat on a bamboo chair. He did not carry the shinshu that was the treasure of the mountain. Su Fingnian returned the embroidered winter to its sheath and walked over to sit on the chair opposite Wang Xiaoping. The sword maniac who did not carry a sword was just a handsome middle-aged uncle with a stiff expression and plain Taoist robe. Wang Xiaoping became a Wudong Taoist very late. It was rumored that before he came to the mountain, he was a rich man's playboy who did not seek an official career. He was infatuated with beauties and swords. After he was hurt, he regarded beauties as a tiger and wolf. In anger, he spent all his family's wealth and joined Wudong. Of Wudong's sword, which others could not understand in their lifetime. But, of Wudong's of Wudong. Of Wudong, sword, he. Of T sword of Wudong's. Wang's, and, of the T he. T. Of. Su Fingnian sat there for a few hours. He only saw the #1 fool of Wudong Mountain chewing the tea leaves slowly. Compared to the tea of spring and summer, autumn tea was slightly older. The taste of the tea was bland. It was the first time he saw a person eating it. Su Fingnian listened to the rustling of the bamboo leaves. For some reason, he thought of a bamboo poem that his second sister had written. It described the sound of bamboo as the sound of people suffering and the sobbing of beauties in their twilight years. At that time, it was very praised by scholars. Now that she had made such a harsh comment in Shengyin Academy, the scholars regretted that they had praised Su Weisheng. Su Fingnian looked around. There was only bamboo. He felt bored. Holding the embroidered winter tightly, he got up and left silently. Wang Xiaoping looked at His Royal Highness's back. He seemed to be hesitating whether or not to make a long sword out of a bamboo. Su Fingnian left the bamboo forest. His clothes were soaked again. The bamboo forest was indeed not a place for people to stay. Su Fengnian's heart trembled even more when he didn't use his sword. The osmanthus seeds on the mountain had all fallen. Su Fengnian didn't know how many times he had gone up and down the deep pool at the bottom of Shenxian Peak. He didn't leave behind any other places on Mount Wudong with water and lakes. He finally found more than 400 pebbles. They were black and white, and he piled them up in the thatched cottage. His Royal Highness used the embroidered winter to chop the waterfall and used the embroidered winter to carve stones. There was a sword art in the Qingshui Pavilion sword practice record that was similar to women's embroidery. It was called Fairy Scattering Flowers. It was the most exquisite and mysterious. It was probably comparable to the profound sword art of the Wu family's sword tomb. Su Fengnian applied this sword art to the tip of the embroidered winter. Every stroke and stroke was extremely taxing. At first, he could only carve 2 or 3 stones a day. As he got better, he could carve 4 or 5 stones a day. When it snowed on the mountain, Su Fengnian could close his eyes and carve 13 or 14 stones in a day. Su Fengnian counted with his fingers. It was about time to leave Mount Wudong. After all, he still had to go to Jiuhua to ring the bell. For the Beiliang Palace, this was something that could not be changed even by thunder. For some reason, Su Fengnian became more and more indifferent to the matter of Mount Wudong's sect leader Wang Zhongluo transferring his internal energy. He didn't know if it was the bull riding Hong Shixiang's way of the heavens, or Wang Xiaoping's sword and bamboo, or the death pledge in front of Taishu Temple. Hong Shixiang patiently carved 361 stones. There were 181 black stones, and 180 white stones. There were 19 in length and breadth, and 19 multiplied to 361 stones. Imperceptibly, Su Fengnian's knife art went from rough to fine. Occasionally, he would go to the bamboo forest to ask for a beating. He could actually force the sword maniac Wang Xiaoping to use his sword. He had to chop down a dozen purple bamboos before he could chase His Royal Highness out of the bamboo forest. Most recently, probably because he was extremely fed up with the Crown Prince and Xiaodong, he struck again and again, forcefully cleaving out a large empty space in the northeast corner of the purple bamboo forest. Outside the bamboo building, Wang Zhongluo sat across from the sword maniac. He chewed on the raw tea leaves and asked with a smile, "How's the guiding of qi?" Wang Xiaoping, who had only spoken in front of Taishu Temple, nodded. Wang Zhongluo said, "Every time you strike with your sword, you chase Su Fengnian's knife art and qi to one place. The green water pavilion is hidden in the dark, concealing the sword formula. You can clear your mind and guide it." I never thought that Su Fengnian would use his knife art to carve the chess pieces. He accidentally obtained the essence of the Jiazi sword practice manual. Moreover, he learned the tortoise breathing technique from an unknown master. He practiced his knife art at the bottom of the deep pool at the foot of the peak. It's different from my Mount Wudong's mantra. I originally thought that my great yellow courtyard would at most give this His Royal Highness 30 to 40%. Now, it seems that even 50 to 60% is not impossible. The sword maniac's face was filled with anger. The peachwood sword shintu, which had been placed horizontally on the bamboo table, jumped up without warning. Wang Zhongluo stretched out his hand and lightly brushed the table. The ancient sword shintu returned to silence. He smiled and said, "Idiot, with your impetuous temperament, how can you help Wudong surpass the foundation of the Wu family's sword tomb that has been accumulated for more than 10 generations?" Wang Xiaoping smiled. He picked up a handful of emerald green tea leaves from the bamboo basin and chewed them in large mouthfuls. Wang Zhongluo joked, "Do you really have the heart to let your little shitty carry the heavenly Tao of martial arts alone? In the end, Shixiang is only a young man who hasn't even reached 30. Aren't you afraid of tiring him out? Among us seniors who only have age but not comprehension, you are the closest to the heavenly Tao. Therefore, don't look at your unpleasant expression when you talk about Shixiang. I know that among the seniors, you think the most highly of this little shitty. Therefore, when His Royal Highness leaves the mountain, you have to be more diligent. Carry the burden and learn from Wu Luding of the Wu family's sword tomb. Walk around the East China Sea, the South China Sea, Baliang and the Western barbarians. Walk around and maybe your sword Dao will be completed. Sitting down and discussing the Dao is not a good way to put it. Wudang's number one idiot nodded. His gaze was lonely as he looked at this senior apprentice brother who spoke so casually. Wang Zhonglo saw this gaze and laughed heartily. It's just a small yellow court. Compared to Wudang's 1,000-year plan, what is it? Sword maniac Wang Xiaoping shook his head. He probably wanted to say that this yellow court was not small. Wang Zhonglo ignored this and chuckled. I had Shishang secretly hide a few chess pieces. At this time, His Royal Highness probably couldn't find our little shitty. He can only bitterly go to the bottom of the pond to look for stones. I have to hurry. The sword maniac subconsciously reached out to grab the peachwood sword. The Wudong sect leader shook his head. He slowly got up and walked out of the purple bamboo forest. Wang Xiaoping sat in front of the bamboo building in a daze. He turned around and slashed down the bamboo building. Chapter 57. An expert would pay attention to qi, a dynasty would have its luck, and a sect would have its atmosphere. There were 3 sects in the world. Mount Longhu was highly regarded by the Liang dynasty and had been the leader of the orthodoxy for hundreds of years. Each of the 4 celestial masters was more profound than the other. Mount Longhu produced many geniuses, and almost every generation there would be 1 or 2 geniuses who had the potential to become the sect leader. In the last 100 years, there was Gu Hong, who wrote the Tai Chi Jindan, who denounced external alchemy as a heretical school. She wrote a voluminous 200,000 incantations, pointing the spearhead at Wudong, criticizing Wudong's danding pie until it was completely black and blue. 50 years ago, there was Qi Xuanjin who single-handedly slaughtered 6 demon sect protectors. It was a pity that until the demon-slaying platform of Mount Longhu, this Shinren was never able to compete with Wang Xianji. Otherwise, the title of number 1 wouldn't be empty. 30 years ago, there was a celestial master protector who was proficient in internal alchemy. He forcibly extended the old emperor's lifespan by 15 years. It was rumored that this was a method of exchanging one's life for another. This celestial master, who once said in his prime that he would live for 60 years, passed away before reaching 70. However, he brought 100 years of glory to Mount Longhu. 10 years ago, there was a debate between Buddhism and Taoism that lasted 100 days. In the end, it was decided by an unknown Taoist from Mount Longhu. His eloquence was brilliant, and his teachings were exquisite. The 2 Zen temples who had victory in their grasp could only admit defeat. As for Wudong, it seemed that in the last 100 years, there wasn't anyone or anything worth mentioning. Where did the grand atmosphere come from? If Wang Zhonglo hadn't cultivated the great yellow courtyard, this mountain would have been forgotten by the world except for the devout Baliang pilgrims. There were still big and small lotus peaks, jade pillars, and the black tortoise. Today, Hong Shixiang was concocting pills with the oldest senior on the mountain, Song Jiming. However, it wasn't the blue cloud peak with the largest pill furnace in the world, but rather the little lotus peak. The bronze furnace was only half the height of a person, and it didn't consume much charcoal, sulfur, or Dan stones. They didn't pick a good day, didn't build an altar or draw scrolls, and didn't set up any treasured swords or ancient mirrors to ward off evil spirits. From an outsider's point of view, it didn't look like they were concocting pills at all. But Song Jiming was extremely nervous, 100 times more so than when he was on the blue cloud peak. He squatted on the ground and personally controlled the fire, not even noticing that his 2 strands of white eyebrows were drooping to the ground. At Song Jiming's age, he had concocted countless pills, and many of them were sent to the hands of high officials and dignitaries through various channels, even to the imperial relatives in the capital. The knowing destiny pill was quite famous throughout the dynasty, but the old man knew that concocting pills was like cultivating the Tao. His comprehension was limited, and he lacked the perfect harmony of yin and yang. Therefore, when the Taiji Golden Pill was first published, Song Jiming could only smile bitterly, unable to refute it. But after little junior brother came up the mountain and read all the books, he found a new path. He didn't restrict himself to inner and outer elixirs, and cultivated both inner and outer elixirs. Therefore, in these years of concocting pills, it wasn't Song Jiming who taught Hong Xixiang how to subdue dragons and tigers, but senior brother who was willing to be the fire boy for little junior brother. In the eyes of His Royal Highness, this bull rider was the most idle person, but in the eyes of all the senior brothers, Hong Xixiang was the reincarnation of the Zhenwu great emperor who had a chance to turn the tide. In the eyes of the sect leader Wang Zhongluo, the 4,000-word deed of thorough comprehension was the most profound secret scripture in the 500 years of Taoism. How was it teaching people how to concoct pills? It was teaching people how to attain the supreme great Tao. Wang Zhongluo never hid anything, and it was precisely these 4,000 words that gave him the confidence to practice the Great Yellow Court Pass. There was also the fist technique that Su Fengnian learned, which was clearly the highest realm of combining the Jade Pillar Mantra and Wudong swordsmanship. It wasn't found in the pavilion of scriptures as Hong Xixiang said, but was comprehended by this young Grand Marshal uncle in his boring daily divinations. It was the most compatible with the Tao of heaven. How would the young Taoist priest know how shocking his actions were? Perhaps even if he knew, with his cowardly character of being scolded by His Royal Highness every day as a coward, he would only nag that the bottom of the mountain was too scary, and that he wouldn't leave the mountain until he became number one in the world. Hong Xixiang furrowed his brows as he stared at the pill cauldron. He suddenly pulled senior brother Song and shouted, "Retreat!" Song Jiming knew something was wrong. No matter how precious a cauldron of pills that cost countless gold and silver was, how could it compare to junior brother? He immediately rolled up his sleeves, bringing Hong Xixiang with him as he swiftly floated backwards. With a boom, the pill cauldron exploded. The entire Wudong sect heard this ear-piercing boom. Thick green smoke could be seen rising in spirals from all the Taoist temples and palaces on the various mountain peaks. They didn't make a fuss about it, and after looking up and seeing this smoke, they continued to work. "Ha, our Grand Marshal uncle is being naughty again." On Little Lotus Peak, the two Marshal brothers were in a very sorry state. The cuffs of Song Jiming's Taoist robe had become rags, but in any case, he was still able to protect the main culprit, junior brother. Hong Xixiang ran over to the bronze pill cauldron. This cauldron was personally forged by him, bit by bit. Moreover, the number of pilgrims in Wudong sect these past few years had been declining day by day. The mountain was famous for being short on money. If it wasn't for senior brother Song opening the cauldron day and night at Clear Sky Peak and not missing any good day to refine pills, he would have long been so poor that his bell would have rung. After all, Wudong sect wasn't Mount Longhu. Although it wasn't difficult to be self-sufficient on this mountain, if one wanted to do more things, they really didn't have the strength. Hong Xixiang's thoughts were simple, but that didn't mean he was an idiot who didn't understand the ways of the world. If he treated returning to one's original simplicity as childish, then there really wouldn't be any smart people in this world. Hong Xixiang naturally knew why sect leader De Xixiang invited His Royal Highness to Wudong, but he didn't reject it like senior brother Wang. Hong Xixiang squatted down and looked at the muddy medicinal pills in the broken cauldron. He stretched out 2 fingers and picked up a bit. He brought it to the tip of his nose and sniffed it. He frowned and said, "It's still far away." "Third Xixiang, it seems I'll have to borrow your cauldron. When the time comes, don't scold me. Senior brother Wang already won't let me go to his bamboo forest. If I also can't go to Clear Sky Peak, sigh." The amiable-looking Song Jiming looked at his junior brother's bitter face and chuckled, "Well said." Hong Xixiang suddenly looked up at the sky, lost in thought. Song Jiming remembered a small matter from many years ago and joked, "Junior brother, this year you've been trying to worm your way into being friends with His Royal Highness. What, you can't bear to part with that red-clothed girl surnamed Sue? If I remember correctly, that year when that little girl went up the mountain in a snowy day wrapped in red, your eyes were glued to her." Hong Shixiang smiled bitterly. "Third Shixiang, even you came. Now only senior brother Wang hasn't laughed at me. At that time I was only 14, what did I know?" Song Jiming smiled and asked, "How old are you this year?" Hong Shixiang, who never remembered this, carefully counted on his fingers, 24. 25. Song Jiming smiled playfully. "Then you remember clearly that you saw that girl when you were 14? Hong Shixiang didn't speak and continued to stare blankly at the sky. That year in Beiliang Palace, led by the pillar state Su Shao, nearly 100 people went up the mountain. At that time, the pillar state had just conquered half of Jianghu. Everyone in the world was waiting for the Beiliang cavalry to crush Wudong as well. But they didn't expect that on this trip up the mountain, Su Shao didn't want to tear down the memorial arch of the Black Tortoise in prosperity, but only burn incense. From the small group of people he brought to Wudong, it was clear that the eldest daughter Su Ji, who had just grown up, the second daughter Su Weisheng, whose poetry and literary talent had begun to shake the world, Su Fengnian, who had an inexplicable yin qi, and Su Longxiang, who had always been simple-minded. After going up the mountain, the 4 children of the pillar state began to wander around. Among them, Su Weisheng was the most domineering and arrogant. She carved the words, "Banished to 3,000 li," on the back of the Zhenwu Great Emperor statue. The words were crooked, but it was enough to show her loftiness. Wudong didn't know whether to laugh or cry when they found out, not even daring to say half a harsh word. The elder sister, Su Jihu, on the other hand, didn't do anything out of line. She wandered around aimlessly, and finally saw a little Daoist boy riding an ox. The first thing she said upon meeting him was, "Hey, little Daoist boy, how old are you?" The little Daoist boy on the back of the green ox thought for a long time with a red face. By the time he was sure of his age, the exceptionally eye-catching red-clothed girl in the snow had already walked away impatiently. Only Hong Shixiang, who was already the youngest martial granduncle of Wudong at that time, was left behind. He muttered, 14. The second time they met, she was about to get married thousands of li away in Jiangnan. The red-crowned crane circled in the sky. It was a paradise on earth. Near the turtle camel tablet on the little lotus peak, she saw Hong Shixiang. She smiled and asked, "Hey, little Daoist boy, this mountain is so boring. Why don't you marry me?" How interesting. His face was still red, and he couldn't say a single word. Afterwards, there was no afterwards. They never saw each other again. He only knew that her name was Su Jihu, and that she liked to wear a dazzling red dress. In the end, he only heard her mutter to herself one day, "I really want to ride a yellow crane." Hong Shixiang once again pinched his fingers. He made an exception and counted twice a day. He was counting whether or not he could leave the mountain in this lifetime. He was counting whether or not he could ride a crane down to Jiangnan. He didn't know that if he could leave the mountain in such a way that no one before or after him could do so, he would definitely be treated as an immortal. The peak of Wudong Mountain was shrouded in dark clouds. One could faintly hear the sound of thunder. Hong Shixiang suddenly raised his head and stood up, looking in the direction of the hanging immortal peak. Chapter 58. On the little lotus peak, Song Jiming discovered that his second martial brother Qinyao, fourth martial brother Yu Xingrui, and fifth martial brother Wang Xiaoping, who were in charge of the Tao of virtue and purity, had all gathered behind him. Together with his junior martial brother Hong Shixiang, they looked in the direction of the hanging immortal coffin. They saw a man riding an ox madly galloping towards the tortoise camel tablet. With a single leap, he stood on top of the tablet, his 10 fingers moving in a daze. Although his junior martial brother was unable to remember his own age, his attainments in the art of divination were profound. He was thoroughly familiar with the 4 classics of the Book of Changes, and had mastered them through a comprehensive study. In the field of divination, he was far superior to his senior martial brothers of the same generation. Even the headmaster of the previous generation, who had divined that the black tortoise would prosper for 500 years, admitted his inferiority. Sweat seeped out of Hong Shixiang's forehead as he fell onto the tablet. The group of senior apprentice brothers also became nervous. Yu Xingrui stood under the tortoise camel tablet and carefully asked, "Is there a change?" Hong Shixiang wiped his sweat and smiled evilly. "There's no mistake about it. It's just that this thunderstorm is smaller than I expected. It's not enough to scare those sneaky people from Mount Longhu." Yu Xingrui and the others felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. They looked at each other and smiled. Their eldest brother had cultivated the Great Yellow Court and had already spread the word. Their arch-rival, Mount Longhu, naturally wanted to send people over to investigate. They hoped that Wudong's sect was just putting on a show of strength out of desperation, and that their eldest brother had quietly come out of seclusion. The people from Mount Longhu, who had been hiding on Mount Longhu since a long time ago, probably did not think much of it. They thought that Wudong's sect's so-called cultivation of the Great Yellow Court was just a publicity stunt. Their youngest brother was so angry that he purposely picked a day like today. It was Wudong's sect's Shenwu Demon Subduing Day, which happened once every few decades. The Dehuang Ting Pass, in short, was the formation of the Dehuang Ting Pass in the hut. The tortoise drew qi to the spiritual root, and the qi dynamic resonated with the heaven and earth. Daoist priests were called Jinren, from the ancient saying in the Dehuang Ting Sutra, "Immortals and Daoist priests are not gods, they accumulate energy and qi and believe it to be true." Only after cultivating the Dehuang Ting Pass could one be considered a Jinren. Nowadays, people like to call any Daoist priest a Jinren whenever they saw one. Buddhism and Taoism had been fighting for hundreds of years, but there was one thing that was extremely common, and that was that Buddhism and Taoism came from the world. They cultivated the ways of the world, and did not advocate the level of martial arts. Therefore, when Qi Xianzhu, who was widely recognized as having boundless supernatural powers, appeared in Longhu Mountain back then, his reputation was like the sun in the sky, but he only subdued demons and exorcised devils, and did not compete with Wang Xianji for fame. A few years ago, Wang Zhongluo broke the Kanglan Sea with one finger, and was listed as one of the top 10 masters by busybodies. Longhu Mountain despised and spurned him, and said a lot of unpleasant things in public and semi-public. Even the immature little Taoist children in Longhu Mountain were reciting a song about the Wudong sect leader. In this regard, Wang Zhongluo did not argue, and did not say anything. After breaking the river and saving the people who fell into the water, he went up the mountain to cultivate the yellow courtyard. Yu Xingrui smiled and asked, "Little junior brother, how much of the yellow courtyard can His Royal Highness achieve?" Hong Shixiang sighed and said, "About 50 to 60%. Yu Xingrui said in shock, "Then doesn't this child's internal energy surpass Wudong's?" Hong Shixiang shook his head and said, "That still needs a long time to digest." Chen Yao said helplessly, "These days, Wudong has spent a lot of effort to expand Su Fengnian's meridians and acupoints, wasting countless medicinal pills. It's like digging a deep pool in his body, and the sect leader's senior brother's internal energy is like the waterfall of the hanging Immortal Peak, rushing down, full to the point of overflowing. Absorbing half of it is already a great fortune. This is also good, big senior brother can still leave half of the yellow courtyard." Hong Shixiang still shook his head, "Not necessarily." Chen Yao was puzzled, "What do you mean?" Hong Shixiang revealed a secret that the sect leader Wang Zhongluo told him before he went into seclusion. Back then, sect leader's senior brother cultivated according to the acupoints of His Royal Highness, so no matter how much of His Royal Highness can accept in the end, big senior brother's yellow courtyard will only disperse, not a drop will be left. Yu Xingrui's face was pale, he muttered, "What should we do, what should we do?" Qinyao smiled bitterly. Why bother sect leader senior brother? No matter how weak our Wudang is, we don't have to be so afraid of that great pillar country. Wang Xiaoping looked at the sky, turned around and left. Hong Shixiang did not even turn his head, he only said softly, little senior brother Wang, don't go to the Yellow Courtyard Peak to find trouble with the Taoists of Mount Longhu, it will ruin your pure heart of the sword. If you don't kill people who don't deserve to be killed, once an exception is made, the Shinto sword will be entangled by the inner demon, overshadowing the Xianji sword will, in this life, little senior brother Wang will gradually drift away from the path of the sword, the harder you work, the further you will drift away. Wang Xiaoping paused for a moment, it was only a slight pause, then his heart was free of worries, he still carried the Shinto sword on his back and left. In the elephant washing pool, His Royal Highness, who had pierced into the deep pool to pick pebbles to use as chess pieces, slowly bent down and groped around at the bottom of the pool, except that his speed was slightly slower than walking on land, other than that there was nothing unusual. The pool was 1,000 feet deep, it was even colder than the bottom of the lake in the prince's mansion. Su Fingnian thought that he had only learned how to swim, he did not know that this strange breath-holding was the same as the Taoist's return to the origin breath. Not to mention that Su Fengnian's internal energy was still thin, he still found the right path, the difference was huge. From afar, a mountain man could not compare to a mountain climber, but after climbing a mountain and not finding the path, he could not compare to a person who found the path. As for the thousands of paths up the mountain, which path to take and which step to reach, it all depended on fate, opportunity, and personal hard work. Su Fingnian picked up a dozen or so smooth pebbles, he was not in a hurry to float to the surface of the water. Looking at the scenery at the bottom of the pool was also very interesting, otherwise His Royal Highness would not often go to the bottom of the lake to visit the white-haired old man. It's just that the pool was deep and serene, the scenery he could see when he looked up or down was blurry. Su Fingnian did not know about the thunder and lightning on the summit of Mount Wudang, he only felt that the waterfall's power had increased a bit, the bottom of the pool was getting colder and more unbearable. Walking to the edge of the huge rock rooted at the bottom of the pool, Su Fengnian carried his spoils of war and sprinted to the surface of the lake. Above the elephant washing pool, a white waterfall poured down like a vase of guanine. Wudang sect leader Wang Zhonglo flew to the huge rock, bent his knees and sat down, looking at the bottom of the pool, he smiled slightly. Closing his eyes. Gently exhaling, gently inhaling. The mist on the surface of the water rose and diffused. Chapter 59. As the leader of one of the three major Taoist sects in the world, the old Taoist priest did not have many ups and downs in his life. He was born poor and lonely. In order not to starve to death, he was sent to the mountain by his parents at the age of 12. Other than morning and evening classes, he was on duty at the Taishu temple. Every day, he swept the floor until the incense burned out. Day after day, year after year. At that time, his master, Chen Ningning, had not yet become the leader of Wudang, but he had more than 20 disciples. Among them, Wang Zhonglo's aptitude was below average. He was only willing to immerse himself in reading scriptures. When he swept the floor, he would hold an introductory classic. Only at the age of 24 was he qualified to read the Fortune of Pilgrims. At the age of 40, he could barely be considered to have achieved a small success in Taoism. Therefore, when the previous leader, Chen Ningning, passed away and Wang Zhonglo took over Wudang, the world was in an uproar. At that time, even Mount Longhu had not heard of this middle-aged Taoist priest. Unexpectedly, most of the immortals of Wudang's generation had amazing skills when they were young, but stopped when they were old. Only the inconspicuous Wang Zhonglo gradually reached the Great Way and skyrocketed. Wang Zhonglo waved his sleeves. His Taoist robe surged and fluttered. It actually managed to pull the waterfall that was falling down with great force over. The waterfall tilted like a bridge. The deed of thorough comprehension surpassed the Taoist classic, the verses of Old Man on the River, which proposed that the 5 viscera hid the spirit. It was in the first sentence, 3 parts, 8 scenes, and 24 spirits. The old immortal breathed into his dantian, closed his eyes and entered meditation. He was full of spirit. His whole person was like the Taoist immortals described in the classics when they immortalized, shining brightly. Wang Zhongluo was silently reciting, the 5-colored clouds swirled in the evening mist. I closed my eyes and looked at each other. Only then did I know that my body was a paradise. So the yellow court was a blessed land, yellow robes with purple stripes and dragon and tiger seals. Spirit and life depend on Taishian. 3 breaths, 2 breaths, and 4 qi are connected. The world loves grains and the 5 tastes. Only I eat the Taihe yin yang qi alone. 2 water kings were born from the same school, making people live forever in the 9 heavens. With every sentence, the old Taoist priest spat out a golden aura from his mouth, lingering between heaven and earth. In the end, a total of 81 golden auras wrapped around the main waterfall and crashed into the deep pool together. When Su Fingnian was halfway up, he felt that something was wrong with the lake. First, it was getting colder, then it was boiling hot. So, he increased his speed. The most frightening thing was that he could vaguely see a water column in the sky rushing straight at him. Su Fingnian gritted his teeth and went against the flow, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not break through the water dragon and the treacherous golden lake surface. No matter how hard he tried, it was to no avail. The surface of the lake seemed to be covered with a huge lid that weighed 1,000 pounds. It was impossible to lift it with human strength. Su Fingnian's consciousness gradually became blurry. He still held tightly onto the pebble that he was going to use the green water pavilion sword formula to carve a chess piece. In his unconsciousness, he suddenly remembered the words of his second sister, Su Weisheng, who doesn't burn in the furnace of heaven and earth. He also remembered how he almost drowned in the lake when he was young and playful. He also remembered the first time he used a knife to kill someone. Was he going to die? Su Fingnian fainted. The pebbles in his hand fell to the ground. Wang Xiaoping went to Huangting Peak, but did not kill anyone. The 3 from Mount Longhu tactfully left the mountain. The sword maniac's sword was truly terrifying. It wasn't that the 3 of them didn't have the strength to fight back, but Wang Xiaoping had all the advantages on Mount Wudong. Her chances of winning were too slim. Wang Xiaoping came to the elephant washing pool and sat down with his eyes closed. The peachwood on his knees jumped and buzzed. His Royal Highness was held up by the golden aura. He floated above the waterfall crashing down on his head. Wang Xiaoping did not look. With his temper, he wanted to cut the waterfall in half. This waterfall was his senior brother's lifetime of cultivation. One day and night later, the thunderstorm stopped. The atmosphere on the mountain was fresh. His Royal Highness was carried by Hong Shixiang to the hut. In the middle of his forehead, there was a red date mark. Wang Xiaoping went down the mountain with his sword. Hong Shixiang and Wang Zhongluo came near the tortoise camel tablet. The old Taoist priest looked normal, but Hong Shixiang knew very well that his senior brother was in his twilight years. He had at most 2 or 3 years left. The young martial granduncle said bitterly, "Must Wudong rise like this?" The old Taoist priest said calmly with a smile, "Not necessarily. It's just that whether I cultivate the great yellow courtyard or not, what's the benefit to Wudong? We can't always stand in the latrine and not take a shit. Having me as the Taoist priest is really a big use for a small talent. You have a light personality that goes with the flow. Me doing this can give you a bit of pressure. It's always a good thing. Look, even your little senior brother Wang has gone down the mountain. If nothing goes wrong, with his talent and this trip, he will be able to suppress the Wu family's sword tomb. When the time comes, you'll be on the mountain and he'll be at the foot of the mountain. Let's not talk about our master's black tortoise will rise for 500 years. In any case, we'll have more incense money. You've been wearing this Taoist robe for 7 or 8 years and you can't even bear to change it. When the time comes, you'll be able to change into a new one. Hong Shishang squatted on the ground and sighed again and again. He said helplessly, "You only dare to say this to me. If the other senior brothers hear this, they'll be angered to death." The old Taoist priest laughed loudly, without any dispirited or dejected expression. Hong Shixiang was silent. He held his chin and looked at the distant mountain in a daze. Wang Zhongluo said softly, "Su Fengnian's evil tendencies are strong, but he's not a bad person. I won't say much about your association with him. I'm just afraid that in the future, Jianghu and the imperial court will not be peaceful." Hong Shixiang said softly, "I can't control that." Wang Zhongluo sat beside his junior brother and said guiltily, "Once I let go, you won't be able to leave the mountain for the time being. Do you resent your senior brother?" Hong Shixiang laughed, "Of course I resent you. But if you don't let me be the sect leader, I won't resent you." Wang Zhongluo snorted, "Don't even think about it. If you resent me, then resent me. When the time comes, I won't be able to see or hear you. Go ahead and resent me." Hong Shixiang shook his head, "Senior brother, can't you act like a sect leader a little?" The old Taoist priest did not agree. He was not those old fellows of Mount Longhu. Everyone below immortals were humans. Seniority and status were all empty things. If one could not uphold virtue and stand up for himself, everything was just an external object that could not be brought into the coffin. Why bother to put on a stern face and look at people for decades? Wang Zhongluo suddenly said softly, "Junior brother, let's have a competition. It's been many years since we've had a competition." "Ah, it's a competition." Hong Shixiang looked as if he was facing a great enemy. He said nervously, "That's not good, right?" The old sect leader tried to goad him, "You don't dare." Hong Shixiang said with youthful vigor, "Then let's have a competition." Two of Wudang's most senior Taoist priests were at the edge of Little Lotus Peak's cliff, doing a shocking thing. Peeing. The old sect leader sighed, "Back then, I peed 10 feet in the wind, but now I'm old and my shoes are wet. I'm old, I can't help but admit defeat." Hong Shixiang laughed loudly, "How is it? Farther than you, right?" The old sect leader patted his junior brother's shoulder and said earnestly, "This matter, when Master lost to me back then, he told me that if I lose to junior brother one day, I can put down my burden." Hong Shixiang's face was bitter. The old Taoist priest looked into the distance and sighed, "It's not about the height of the mountain. It's a pity that I won't be able to see the day when Wudang prospers." Hong Shixiang nodded and wanted to sneak over to pat his senior brother's shoulder. There was a bit on his hand just now, he had to wipe it clean. Why did his senior brother pat his shoulder? Hong Shixiang was clear about it. The old sect leader skillfully dodged and said angrily, "Your Taoist robe is older than mine. Senior brother's is brand new." Hong Shixiang withdrew his hand and said angrily, "That's too unfair." The Wudang sect leader laughed heartily and left Little Lotus Peak. From afar, he said, "Junior brother, if you really go down the mountain in the future, you have to be more imposing and give your senior brother some face." Chapter 60. When Su Fengnian woke up, he had a splitting headache. He sat up shakily and picked up the bamboo flask from the bedside to drink some spring water. He went to the table to pick up the celadone bottle and poured in the last 2 pills. He drank the cold water from the bamboo flask in one gulp. The headache lessened and he immediately felt refreshed. He caught a glimpse of the embroidered winter saber lying on top of a pile of secret manuals. He reached out to grab it and heard the saber vibrate with the sound of metal and stone. Only then did he realize that the Jinqi in his body was circulating and nourishing his bones, as if he had endless strength. Su Fengnian subconsciously wanted to pull out the saber, but he suppressed this impulse. When he arrived outside the hut, he saw the bull rider making a fire in front of the stove and cooking a pot of winter bamboo shoots. Su Fengnian asked, "Did you steal those chess pieces of mine?" The young Shishizu pretended to be stupid and said, "I don't know." Su Fengnian frowned. Before he even pulled out his saber to threaten him, the bull rider ran away with a guilty conscience. He had dug out 2 to 3 caddies of winter bamboo shoots with great difficulty, but running for his life was more important. He did not have time to care about the delicious winter bamboo shoots. Su Fengnian walked to the stove and cooked the winter bamboo shoots. He picked up a pair of chopsticks and slowly ate it clean. Only then did he go to the cave under the immortal hanging peak and found a small pile of uncarved pebbles. He must have been the bull rider to make up for his mistake. He smiled and sat down against the wall. Following the superior sword style described in the Green Water Pavilion sword practice record of Jia Zi, he used the embroidered winter saber to carve the chess pieces. However, the first strike was too fast and the hard pebbles were cut in half. Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment. He was no longer in a hurry to use the saber. He sat down cross-legged and meditated, breathing in and out. Along the way, Su Fengnian had already noticed that his 5 senses were unusually sensitive. At this moment, he felt that the divine qi in his body was abundant and clear. He felt a bit of a mysterious empathy for the Taoist chant of breathing in and out is embryonic breathing. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and said to himself, "This is the great yellow courtyard." The bull rider cautiously appeared at the entrance of the cave and smiled. "This is the great yellow courtyard. His Royal Highness can't be wasted." Su Fengnian mocked himself, what a waste. The one riding the bull shook his head and laughed, "You said that too early." Su Fengnian calmly said, "There are several hundred books in the thatched cottage. If I give them all to Wudong, will you accept them?" The young grandmaster laughed foolishly. "Keep." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "From now on, I will give Wudong Mountain 1,000 taels of gold as incense money every year. Do you dare to accept it?" The one riding the bull thought for a moment and smiled bitterly, "I wouldn't dare." Su Fengnian laughed it off and waved his hand, indicating that the bull rider could disappear. Hong Shixiang left the room and walked back in. He said softly, "His Royal Highness, don't hold a grudge against me for stealing your chess piece." Su Fengnian said softly, "Get lost." Su Fengnian spent half a day getting used to the strength of the knife. Then he went to carve the chess pieces. The shape was round and smooth. Looking at the 2 piles of black and white chess pieces, he let out a long sigh of relief. He accidentally blew the chess pieces into a mess and the black and white pieces mixed together. Su Fengnian scolded him in the Western Shu dialect. He packed up again and went to the purple bamboo forest. He chopped 2 luohan purple bamboo and carried them back to the thatched cottage. After splitting them, he spent a day weaving 2 chess boxes. To be able to do this, he had honed his mediocre skills from 3 years of traveling and weaving straw sandals. After putting the 361 chess pieces into the boxes, Su Fengnian looked at the thatched cottage where the secret manuals had not been moved. He then hung the knife on his waist and carried the chess boxes out of the cottage. He looked at the deserted vegetable garden. The 2 maids Sweet Potato and Blue Bird were waiting quietly by the side. There was only Hong Shixiang in Wudong to send him off. It was almost the same as the welcoming party of only 2 people in the beginning. As expected, Hong Shixiang sent him to the memorial archway with the words, "Xuanwu Dang Xing." Su Fengnian had already seen the 200 Bailiang cavalry in their armor. He looked back at Lianhua Peak and asked without rhyme or reason, "What's the saying again?" Sweet Potato smiled sweetly and said, 60 years in the mountain is 1,000 years in the world." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Has that white fox face in the tide listening pavilion reached the 3rd floor yet?" Sweet Potato shook her head and said softly, "Not yet. Everyone in Wudong Garden is betting on this. I bet there's still a year and a half left. I bet 6 taels of silver. Green Ant and the others think it will be later." Su Fingnian sat in the carriage and said, "Then I bet 10 taels of silver that white fox face will reach the 3rd floor in a year." Sweet Potato massaged His Royal Highness' shoulders while Su Fingnian leaned against her chest. He opened the chess box and rubbed a chess piece with 2 fingers. He closed his eyes and said softly, "More important." Sweet Potato, whose natural body fragrance would fade in the winter, made a sound of agreement. Her eyes glanced at Bluebird and Woodone Garden, who did not get along with her the most. Bluebird did not say anything. She only looked at His Royal Highness's forehead. Her eyes were bright and full of spirit. The thoughts of her 2 personal maidservants were unspoken. The 200 cavalrymen entered Liangzhou. The people on the main road consciously dispersed. Su Fingnian stopped the carriage halfway and asked Sweet Potato to buy some soy sauce beef to satisfy her appetite. The cooked meat here was the most delicious. The beef was the best in Beiliang. The secret sauce was second to none. The amount of ingredients such as yellow sauce, cinnamon, ginger, star anise and other ingredients was just right. Not to mention the other ingredients, just the old soy sauce on the table alone was enough to make many diners want to steal it after eating the soy sauce, but they never succeeded. In the past, Su Fingnian, Li Hanlin, Yan Qiji, and a few other bad friends would come here to eat to their heart's content after committing crimes. Li Hanlin was even more tyrannical and cruel. He almost moved the entire century-old shop back. If it were not for Su Fingnian's pleading with the old shopkeeper, whose face was covered in tears and snot, the people in the city would not be able to eat this authentic dish. Of course, it was mainly to take care of their own picky tastes. The most interesting thing was not the soy sauce beef, but the delicate little girl in the shop. It was said that she was the daughter of a distant relative of the shop owner. In short, their relationship could be thousands of miles away. Surprisingly, the girl returned to the city for the first time 5 or 6 years ago with a rope in her hand. It was led by a big black and white cat that looked like a bear, but it was not a cat. Later, the learned scholars of Liangzhou cited the classics and discovered that it was the beast that only existed in western Shu. Its nickname was the panda. The ancient books recorded that the beast liked to eat copper and iron. However, in recent years, no one had heard of it stealing the ironware in the neighborhood. Instead, they often saw the girl holding bamboo sticks and bamboo leaves in her hand. After returning from his travels, Su Fengnian never saw the girl and the big cat again. When he went to the shop to eat beef during his travels, he loved to tease the girl. Li Hanlin tried to steal soy sauce several times, but she would hit his hand with a bamboo stick. If it were not for His Royal Highness stopping him, the little girl would have been thrown into the animal cage together with her pet. When Su Fingnian was waiting for the beef, he saw an old beggar leaning against the wall in the distance, shivering. His face was ashen, and he was hungry and cold. He was not far from death. The rich all liked winter. Even if their homes could not afford the charcoal-consuming earth heating, they could wear comfortable and luxurious mink coats, which gave them more face when they went out. However, all the poor people in the world were most afraid of this season. Chapter 61. In addition to the old beggar in ragged clothes, Su Fengnian saw a delicate figure squatting there. Beside her stood a young Buddhist monk wearing a light red kasaya. Su Fengnian did not know what the monk said, but the young monk hurriedly ran away. Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Although there are many Buddhist sects, the rules of wearing kasayas are similar. How can a young monk wear such a color monk robe? This is something that only a preaching monk can wear. Is a young monk qualified to preach the sutras to others? Moreover, shouldn't monks wear a shawl when they go out? Why is that novice monk partial to the right shoulder?" Because the king of Beiliang's concubine had been a Buddhist all her life, His Royal Highness had naturally been influenced by her and was very clear about the Buddhist rules and etiquette. Bluebird corrected him, "That novice monk is partial to the left shoulder." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Where did this young monk come from?" Su Fengnian, who was notorious in Beiliang, had always been very tolerant and kind to monks. Whenever he met them, he would reward them. Generally, most monks would not accept gold or silver, and Su Fengnian did not care about it either. As a result, many fortune-tellers in Liangzhou city had changed their profession to become monks. They did not care about deceiving their masters or killing their ancestors. Receiving rewards from His Royal Highness was the right way to go. Su Fengnian suddenly narrowed his eyes and stared at a middle-aged tantric monk who was walking slowly on the road. He was wearing a red kasaya and his face was haggard. When he walked to the foot of the wall and saw the dying old beggar, his face showed pity. When the young novice monk who did not know the rules rushed to the corner with a basket of steaming buns, he only saw the old beggar's head tilted and he passed away. The tantric monk bent down and reached out to hold the old man's hand, chanting sutras for the dead. The young novice monk handed the steamed buns to the girl who stood up, bowed his head and clasped his palms together. Su Fengnian saw all of this and felt a little emotional. The two monks, one big and one small, no matter where they came from or where they were going. Reaching out was Zen. Lowering one's head is also Zen. When the sweet potato entered the carriage, Su Fengnian suddenly felt that the spiced beef that he drooled over on Mount Wudong was somewhat boring. He put it aside and said softly, "Even though I've obtained the great yellow courtyard of the Wudong sect's leader, I still prefer more monks. The two Zen temples that only comprehend 2 Dians, and the Mount Lantuo that produces ascetic monks in large numbers, are more adorable than Wudong and Longhu." Su Fengnian was about to return to the Fu when he accidentally saw the girl's side profile. He was stunned for a moment before his mood improved. He picked up the bag of marinated beef and stood up with a smile. "Sweet potato and blue bird, I'm going to see an acquaintance. You guys go back first." Su Fengnian left the carriage and stood far away. He waited until the Bailiang cavalry had all left before he walked over to the corner of the wall. Su Fengnian was very fond of the girl that he was not very familiar with. Back when he and Old Huang were at their lowest point in their journey to Langyi County, they coincidentally met this little girl who had run away from home. She claimed that she wanted to roam Jianghu to become a heroine, and she only had a few scraps of silver and copper left. She was already very pitiful. After a fight with Su Fengnian and Old Huang, she generously treated them to a feast of fish and meat. After that, she became completely penniless. The three of them lived in poverty together for a month or so, fooling around and stealing together. It was quite interesting. She was usually the lookout while His Royal Highness and Old Huang took risks. When they escaped, the little girl with 2 goat horn braids ran like the wind. In the end, she said that she wanted to go to the south to see the sea, so they separated. Su Fengnian only knew that her surname was Li, and she liked to call herself Miss Li. If he called her Heroine Li, she would be happy for a few days even if she starved. Su Fengnian slowly walked over. Why was there a little monk beside Heroine Li? Her house was not a temple, right? Thinking of this, Su Fengnian, who was holding a piece of beef in one hand, held Shodong in the other. That tantric monk was not simple. As he walked closer, he heard Miss Li's words. She was educating the little novice monk with her hands on her hips. "Stupid Nanbei, how many times have I told you? You can call me Dong Dong or Cici, but you are not allowed to call me Thing. Thing, 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 doesn't it sound bad?" The little monk, who was wearing a green and light red kasaya, had red lips and white teeth. He had a very delicate appearance. Even Su Fengnian 3 years ago could see that he had a unique bone structure. The little monk said weakly, "Thing, I think your name is quite nice." Miss Li, who was no longer wearing her 2 ponytails, pinched the little monk's ear and said angrily, "Why don't you try calling me that again?" The little monk did not know how to change his mind. He said blankly, "Thing." The little girl was mad. She jumped up and knocked the little monk's head, who was taller than her. "Stupid. You are 1,000 times, 10,000 times stupider than Su Fengnian. The corners of Su Fengnian's mouth curled up. See, there are still people in this world who have a unique insight. The little monk said weakly, monks do not lie. If I call you lazy, you will hit me again. The little girl asked angrily, then let me ask you, can monks like girls? Monks must abstain from lust, do you understand? The little monk was not really stupid. He looked at the sky and pretended not to hear anything. The little girl turned her head and looked at the old beggar who did not get to eat the meat bun. She looked a little depressed. The little monk said in a low voice, after buying the meat bun, we have no money. I didn't bring much when I snuck out. You spent money, Anne. In the end, he did not dare to say that he was a big spender. The little girl was angry. She said angrily, I told you that my father hid his secret stash in the alms bowl under his bed. Don't you know how to steal more? If you are not stupid, then what are you? The little monk said guiltily, if I steal too much, when we go back to the temple, my master will punish me to buy rouge and face powder for your mother. When the little girl heard the word rouge and face powder, she became interested. She did not care about how he addressed her anymore and looked around. Seeing her like this, the little monk quickly said, we really don't have any money. The little girl sighed in despair. Su Fengnian, who was standing behind them, laughed and said, Miss Li, do you want rouge and face powder? I will buy it for you. The biggest rouge shop in Liangzhou has the green swallow branch that the imperial concubines use. It's not expensive. I don't even need to spend money to buy it. The little girl turned around abruptly and saw that Su Fengnian was no longer unkempt, wearing a hemp shirt and straw shoes. She didn't recognize him at first. After looking at him for a long time, she jumped up and said in surprise, Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian picked up the marinated beef and said with a smile, isn't it? The little girl patted the little lotus's chest and finally felt relieved. She said with a bright smile, I remember you said you were from Western Liang. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to find you in Liangzhou. Su Fengnian smiled and said, don't worry. It will be harder to find me than to find me here. The little girl did not think too much about it. She was just happy. When the little monk saw Su Fengnian, he did not react. He was just thinking about how to deal with the basket of meat buns. Of course, he could not eat them and Li Zi did not like to eat them. Su Fengnian was just about to take the little girl to the rouge shop that treated him like a wolf, a tiger, or a leopard. Subconsciously, he was about to unsheath his embroidered winter knife. The middle-aged monk of Tantric Buddhism took a step forward. The monk asked with an awkward accent, you are Su Fengnian, the eldest son of the king of Beiliang. Su Fengnian smiled and said, you are. The monk said calmly, I come from Mount Nalanda in the western region. I want to invite His Royal Highness to Mount Nalanda. Chapter 62. Mount Lantuo. There was a kind of extreme reverence there. Before entering Mount Lantuo, many of the people had unreachable statuses in the secular world. They might be the king of Ganlafan, the prince of Shitzi country, or the imperial family of Peacock dynasty. Each one was more prestigious than the last. However, after entering Mount Lantuo to cultivate, after leaving the secular world, they would fall into the dust and become no different from ordinary monks. There were many rules in Mount Lantuo. One was not allowed to wear silk or satin, one's cassock could not be wrinkled, one could not fill one's stomach, and one could only curl one's legs on a 1-meter square cloth mat when sleeping. There were so many rules that people of the Central Plains were dumbfounded. His Royal Highness had heard about the legends of Mount Lantuo. For example, there were traveling monks who saw a lost item on the side of the road. They would draw a circle around the item and then sit on the side. Often, they would wait for several days in vain. However, generally speaking, no one would be greedy for something that was drawn in a circle by a monk of Mount Lantuo. Furthermore, there was an old monk who had been imprisoned for 34 years in Mount Lantuo. The problem was that no one knew what the reincarnation of the living Buddha was waiting for. Therefore, monks who had cultivated in Mount Lontua had a golden signboard embedded in them. They were popular everywhere. Some fake abbots who shaved their heads and pretended to be bald liked to say, "I came from Mount Lontua," as soon as they opened their mouths. Cultivation in Mount Lontua was extremely difficult and strict in accepting disciples. Therefore, with only 300 people in the temple, it could compete with the 2 Zen temples that had disciples all over the world. One in the east and the other in the west, they complemented each other. Su Fengnian believed the red-clothed monk when he said he came from Mount Lontua. Half of it was because he had just reached out and recited the sutra, and the other half was because he felt the monk's chi flowing eastward like a great river. Judging from the monk's words and actions, he was as still as a mountain, but inside, he was like a river rushing into the sea. Although Su Fengnian had a good impression of Mount Lontua and the monks, there was no room for discussion if they wanted to kidnap His Royal Highness to the western regions. Therefore, he smiled sinisterly and asked, "What if I don't go?" The embroidered winter saber was about to be unsheathed. Su Fengnian was confident that this first strike would be able to break an entire wall. Who would have thought that the monk would only say in a lukewarm tone, "I can wait." Su Fengnian habitually rubbed the hilt of his saber with his thumb and asked, "Wait?" The solemn-looking monk circled around Su Fengnian and then quietly retreated into the distance. He had no intention of kidnapping or stopping His Royal Highness. Not only did Su Fengnian find it absurd, but even the little girl who was watching the show could not understand. She felt that the monks at home who freeloaded on food and drink were more interesting. That rotten mountain was too boring. The little girl finally came back to her senses. She looked at Su Fengnian and asked in a low voice, "Su Fengnian, are you that whose son? Then aren't you His Royal Highness?" Who was it? It must be Su Shao. Whether it was Taoism or Buddhism, men or women, old or young, as long as one was in Jianghu, it seemed that no one dared to call the name of the great pillar state Su Shao. He secretly paid attention to the flow of qi of the great monk of Mount Lontua. This was the so-called bull riding. Su Fengnian, who was still holding the spiced beef, asked with a smile, "Are you afraid? Do you regret knowing me?" The little girl laughed 3 times, but it seemed like she was emboldening herself. Su Fengnian found it very interesting, but he did not expose her. In the past, when they were in Jianghu together, when they encountered a situation, this little girl would always lose but not lose. She was the fiercest when she scolded people and ran away the fastest. The little monk said weakly, "Let's go. Anyway, we've already seen him. If we don't return to the temple, master and mistress will fight with the abbot again." The little girl looked at Su Fengnian and then at the little monk. She seemed to be making a difficult choice between going home and going back. Her limpid eyes subconsciously rolled around the fragrant spiced beef. Su Fengnian did not want to make things difficult for this simple-minded little girl. Without saying anything, he handed the spiced beef to the little girl and turned to leave. "Wait for me for a moment. I'll eat the beef first and let Su Fengnian give you a ride. There's no reason for you to go out of the city with an empty stomach after arriving in Liangzhou." Su Fengnian walked toward the rouge shop in the east of the city. As he passed by the beef shop, he saw a much taller girl with a still young face. She was holding a bamboo stick and sitting on the door sill looking at him. His Royal Highness was in a hurry to buy rouge, so he did not greet him. The reason why the green swallow branch was famous was because of a poem written by his second sister, Su Weisheng. Su Fengnian took the rouge shop for free, and the shopkeeper was willing to do so. Besides, His Royal Highness used to take the courtesans of Liangdi to the shop to choose rouge. If the courtesans who liked the rouge were sincerely happy, His Royal Highness would reward the shop with some silver taels. In the end, the rouge shop with the green plum blossom signboard still earned more than it lost. When Su Fengnian arrived at the shop, he picked a box of green swallow branch and 2 boxes of imperial concubine peach before swaggering off. Everyone in the shop kept quiet out of fear. A few rich men who came with their concubines to throw away money lowered their heads and did not say anything. On the other side, the little monk looked at the little girl whose hands and mouth were covered in grease and reminded her, "Is this Su Fingnian? He is His Royal Highness, but it seems that his reputation is not good." The little girl bit into the marinated beef and said in an open-minded manner, "I'm not good-looking either. Su Fingnian doesn't like me." The little monk became anxious and said, "Who said that?" The little girl did not pay attention to her childhood friend's anxiousness and said with a mischievous smile, "Mother told me that when I find a good friend in the future, I can't find one who is too beautiful. When I find a husband, I can't find one who is too handsome either. It's easy to attract bees and butterflies. I'm considered half a monk, so it's not appropriate to kill too many people." The little monk had no choice but to use his backer and asked, "Thing, did you forget what Master and Master's wife said about men and women outside the temple?" The little girl said in a deadpan manner, "Of course I remember. My father said that the men outside the temple are all evil men who kill people and steal their goods. My mother said that the women outside the temple are all venomous women who speak honey and have a heart of snakes and scorpions." "Stupid Nanbei, are you stupid? My father and mother said that just to scare me." The stupid and foolish little monk was silent. The little girl tilted her head and asked, "Do you hate Su Fingnian?" The little monk shook his head and said, "If Thing likes it, I like it." The little girl hummed twice. His words were pleasant to hear, so she did not care about the unpleasant name Thing. Su Fingnian brought the rouge over. When he saw the little girl using her sleeve to wipe her face, he handed the rouge over to the little girl and said with a smile, "I'll give it to you." The little monk looked at the little girl's happy expression and was not angry. He only sighed like an old man. The little girl hesitated for a moment. "Su Fingnian, is that so-and-so in the prince's mansion?" Su Fingnian smiled and said, "It will take 2 days for them to come back from the northern border." She jumped a bit, "Then let's go to your house to take a look." Su Fingnian did not know whether to laugh or cry. What happened next made Su Fingnian realize how tenacious this heroine's nerves were. When they arrived at the entrance of Bailiang Palace, she glanced at the 2 guardian lions and said seriously, "Unfortunately, I don't have them in front of my house." After entering the prince's mansion, she saw the majestic building that stretched all the way to the top of Mount Qingliang. She muttered, "It's quite big. It's almost half the size of my house." Seeing the flowing water lake and the tide listening pavilion, she giggled and said, "I like this pond. My pond doesn't have this kind of grandeur. Stupid Nanbei, you should learn some skills from my father. You should learn how to move mountains and seas early and move this pond back." Su Fingnian smiled generously and said, "I'll move it back." The little monk said softly, "Little thing, our temple is your home, but it's not yours." The little girl stared at him and said, "Is there a difference?" The little monk was obviously not a guy who could insist on his own opinion in front of her. He whispered, "Is it?" The little girl asked, "Then let me ask you, is a white horse a horse?" The little monk, who thought that he had mistakenly boarded a pirate ship in the temple and learned Buddhism from his master, was even more uncertain. He repeated, "Is it?" Su Fingnian had arranged for the 2 children to stay in a courtyard near Wudong Yuan, which showed how much importance he attached to the little girl. Along the way, Su Fingnian did not dare to look at her too much, for fear that he would frighten this little heroine who always liked to talk nonsense. Since he did not look at the little girl, he could only observe the little monk. The green and light red kasaya was unmistakably the attire of the preaching monks in Buddhism. Although it could not be compared to the scarlet and purple robes bestowed by the imperial court to the eminent monks, it was still quite rare. Those who wore this kasaya had 3 great virtues on their body: the protection of the heavenly dragon, the worship of all living beings, and the respect of Luo Cha. Su Fingnian became more and more curious about which temple was the little girl's so-called home. Su Fingnian sat in the courtyard. The little girl was very happy with her residence and excitedly ran around the house. The little monk, whose kasaya was not on the right shoulder but on the left, squatted beside a swing and stared at the clear sky in a daze. Sweet Potato quietly came behind His Royal Highness. After going down the mountain, Su Fengnian had already learned that the white-haired old man had defeated the hero Wei Beishan who used the Zamadeo. Both of them left Bailiang. In the Wulin world, the Xianyuan family had been struggling at death's door under the suppression of Yuan Zuozong and Lu Qiu. The little butcher Chen Jibao had gained great military merits at the border. Su Xiao was about to return to the mansion. Second sister Su Weisheng seemed to be going home for the new year. Su Fengnian was very sure that his second sister came here to scold him. She scolded Su Xiao for not being strict with her and scolded him for practicing the Zamadeo. Su Fengnian rubbed his burning eyebrows and said self-mockingly, "Sweet Potato, you can prepare the cotton now." Sweet Potato smiled and agreed. In the mansion, who was not afraid of Su Weisheng? Su Fengnian turned his head and saw the little girl holding the corner of her clothes and walking out of the house shyly. The red makeup on her face must be half a pound heavy, right? The little monk stared with his eyes wide open. Sweet Potato turned her head away. It was a bit too horrible to look at. Su Fengnian stood up and said with a smile, "So beautiful." Chapter 63. It was probably the first time in her life that the little girl, who had been living in the temple since she was a child, heard Su Fengnian's praise. She felt relieved after putting on rouge for the first time in her life. Just as she was about to laugh, the rouge on her face fell. She felt sorry for her, so she put on a straight face again and stood timidly by the swing. The little monk was dumbstruck. He probably did not recognize that the fairy in front of him was the girl he liked the most. As the head maid of Wudong Garden, Sweet Potato was good at drawing eyebrows and applying rouge. Seeing the little girl wasting God's gift and Royal Highness helping the villain, Sweet Potato did not dare to laugh. She could only stand further away. Although the little girl's appearance, temperament, and behavior were ordinary, she was still a distinguished guest invited by His Highness. She could not be disrespectful. Su Fengnian still had to go to the Tide Listening Pavilion, so he asked Sweet Potato to slightly correct the little girl. A few boxes of rouge money were nothing. They could not really go out and scare people. It was still okay in the daytime, but at night. Before going to the top of the pavilion to see his master Li Yishan, Su Fengnian went to the second floor to find White Fox Face. He was standing on the ladder and reading the secret manuals on the bookshelf. His Spring Thunder saber was hanging on his waist with a red string tied to the hilt. The books that Su Fengnian brought to Wudong from the library were all picked by White Fox Face. Although both of them practiced the saber, White Fox Face was much better than Su Fengnian in terms of saber skills and attainment. Their cultivation was just like at this moment, one was at the bottom of the ladder and the other was at the top of the ladder. White Fox Face was very focused. No matter what he did, he strived to see through to the end. Su Fengnian waited for him to finish reading the secret manuals. White Fox walked down the ladder and looked at the idiot Su Fengnian whom she had not seen for a year. Finally, her eyes focused on the spot between His Royal Highness's eyebrows. Su Fengnian's appearance was undoubtedly very outstanding. He had the typical red phoenix eyes and silkworm eyebrows. When he smiled, he looked even more charming and elegant. It was just that he met White Fox during his travels when he was at the lowest point of his life. However, when he occasionally washed his face in the stream, even White Fox would be surprised. This idiot's appearance was indeed good, but his temperament did not match. Now, practicing the saber by hook or by crook seemed to be different. What exactly was the difference? White Fox did not ask any questions. Instead, he slashed out with his Spring Thunder in a domineering manner. Xiaodong, which was originally born from the same root, took the opportunity to strike down. When White Fox Face saw that his attack did not work, he exclaimed in surprise, did you learn the superior swordsmanship in Wudong? Su Fengnian, whose right hand was numb from holding the saber, slowly put Xiao Dong back into the scabbard. He smiled and said, "No, I didn't. It's just that Taoist Ox Nose gave me a book called Qingshuwei Pavilion Sword Practice Manual. When I was bored, I used the sword moves in it on my saber skills. Are you interested? This is a secret manual of Wudong swordsmanship. I can't bring it down the mountain, but I've memorized the contents. Can I make a copy for you?" White Fox Face nodded his head without hesitation. Su Fengnian followed him to the corridor on the second floor. White Fox Face said softly, "The world of the old 9 kingdoms of the Central Plains was almost the world of the rich and powerful families. The aristocrats were numerous. King Langjie, Jiang Xie, Wukong Yao, Belinkui, Lujiang He were all rich and powerful. If the pillars of the country only destroyed cities and countries, killed hundreds of thousands of surrendered soldiers, stabbed or hanged the emperor of the enemy country to death, these would not be a big deal in the eyes of some people. However, Su Shao did what he did to Mount Tai to surpass the North Sea. He destroyed nearly half of the 10 rich families. The entire Wukong Yao family of the southern Tang, regardless of age, died. The He family of the Donghua Lujiang only had about 20 orphans and widows left." Su Fengnian was puzzled by White Fox Face's words. He said, "I know all these. Master mentioned them before." White Fox Face smiled and said, "Don't worry. I'm from the Nangong family of Beimang. I have no grudges with you. I'm telling you this because I want to talk about the 9-grade system that has been maintained by the aristocrats for 200 years. Su Fengnian nodded and said, "The masters in the world now seem to follow this system to rank. It saves effort." White Fox Face said softly, "Like the number 1 in the world, under normal circumstances, the 9-grade system does not rank the upper grades. In the eyes of the world, only the saints are qualified." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Yes, but I heard that a few decades ago, there was a scholar of the Xia family who was talented and outstanding. His martial arts attainments were even more extraordinary. He and my master commented on the rivers and mountains. Li Shan commented on the generals and rouge. The mainstay of the Xia family commented on the martial arts, which was even more important to the people of Jianghu. As for the literary commentary, he only finished half of it and died. My second sister seemed to have the intention to continue the commentary. However, she also said that she was unable to do it for the time being. There was still a long way to go before the great talent of the Xia family. The limelight of the northern Xia and the southern Li had attracted the attention of the world back then. White Fox Face said calmly, "That person is my father. He's dead. Those who are on the martial arts ranking list want to kill him. Those who are not on the martial arts ranking list also want to kill him. There's no reason for him not to die." Su Fengnian was shocked. He smiled bitterly and said, "No wonder you want to be the number 1 in the world." White Fox Face looked at Su Fengnian and said slowly, "Your moves are now at the middle lower grades, the blade force is at the middle upper grades, and the inner strength is at the lower grades. It's not impossible for you to catch up with me." Su Fengnian was stunned. "Really?" White Fox Face's lips curled up slightly. "If I stagnate after the age of 40, it's possible for you." Su Fengnian leaned on the railing and said softly, "You're still as honest as ever, just like old Huang." White Fox Face glanced at the winter embroidery blade that was not covered with dust. The last bit of regret in her heart disappeared. She said softly, "How many more years can you fool the world?" Chapter 64. Su Fengnian sighed, "At the very least, I'll have to wait until I completely take over the northern Liang's 300,000 cavalrymen. If I wasn't a prodigal, how could that person in the capital sleep peacefully? If he couldn't sleep peacefully, how could he let the Su family sleep comfortably? After all, this entire world was still under his control." Su Xiao had accumulated this family business, so he could go against all the scholars in the world and become enemies with the Jianghu. There were not many reliable allies in the imperial court. Over the years, northern Liang had been constantly divided. Yan Qiji's father, who hurriedly received the imperial decree and rushed to the capital, was not the first, and definitely not the last. Li Shan said that if I'm too smart, I won't live long, or at least I won't live a happy life. The best outcome is to go to the capital as a hostage. But if I'm too stupid and overdo it, the Beiliang cavalry will disperse before Su Xiao dies. To put it simply, even my 800 cavalrymen only know about Qin Jibao. They don't care about His Royal Highness at all. White Fox smiled and said, every family has its own difficulties. It seems that the aristocratic families are even more so. Su Fengnian's thumb subconsciously rubbed the handle of Xiudong. It's okay. I still have 2 years to wander around. Maybe I'll go to Jianghu soon. When I'm done playing, I'll hold everything that belongs to me in my hands. Bai Hua frowned. Su Fengnian keenly noticed this detail and asked, what's wrong? White Fox returned to the pavilion with a cold face. Su Fengnian looked at White Fox's handsome back and then lowered his head to look at Xiudong. He seemed to understand that White Fox was angry that he was too close to Xiudong. His Royal Highness laughed involuntarily and said, this Xiudong is a murderous knife, not a woman's boudoir. Can't I touch it? Besides, it's already given to me. It's reasonable for me to hug it to sleep or carry it to the toilet. A cold snort came from inside the pavilion as a bookcase was struck by the spring lightning and collapsed. Su Fengnian rushed upstairs and saw Li Shan, who was getting thinner by the day. Li Shan's face was as white as snow, which made Su Fengnian tremble with fear. The state scholar hiding in Beiliang Palace chuckled. If I had known, I wouldn't have let Wei Beishan leave Beiliang. It's a good opportunity for you to practice your blade. Su Fengnian asked, I heard that old man defeated Wei Beishan. Li Shan coughed a few times, picked up the green gourd flask and drank a mouthful of strong liquor. His breath stabilized and he said, Wei Beishan is only a middle-class martial artist. It's not surprising that he was defeated by Chu Kuangnu, who is only one step away from the upper class. Su Fengnian asked curiously, are there really only 10 high-class experts in the world? Li Shan didn't answer directly. He only said with a slight sneer, the so-called upper class of martial arts can't be compared to the upper class of scholars in the past. It's worthless. Su Fengnian hesitated and whispered, Nangong Push said that he's the genius of the Xia family who is as famous as Master. Li Shan laughed. Do I need him to say that? I knew the answer with just a glance. That kid you called White Fox face not only looks like Xia Guanyin, but also looks like a god. If I didn't recognize him, I would be blind. I'm curious whether this kid is a boy or a girl. According to Chen Wei's prediction, Xia Shuyang should have a son. But this White Fox face really doesn't look like a boy. Li Shan agreed with the title White Fox face. He used it casually and didn't think it was ridiculous. Su Fengnian agreed deeply. That's right. I didn't believe it either. If it's a man, it's such a pity. Li Shan nodded. He shook his head and clicked his tongue twice. His face had a rare smile that carried a bit of life. It was no longer lifeless. This pair of master and disciple were indeed master and disciple. Su Fengnian sat up straight and said solemnly, when I returned to the city today, I met a monk who called himself Mount Lantua. He said he wanted to take me to the western regions. Li Shan drank a mouthful of wine and said, this monk Long Shou is quite famous in the western regions. He studied the Vajratop Yoga Sutra under a Tantric Vajra guru. He translated more than 60 Tantric sutras and 110 volumes. His lineage in Mount Lantua is extremely powerful. The generation before him was a great achiever who attained the undying rainbow. Su Fengnian said helplessly, no matter how powerful he is, what does it have to do with me? You can't expect me to leave home and become a monk just because of the name of a mountain, right? Li Shan smiled. Whether it has anything to do with you or not, you'll know when you get there. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. Master, don't be so sarcastic. That tantric cultivation is comparable to the Wu family's sword tomb. They go to the hall 4 times a day. The earliest hall starts late at night. Regardless of whether it's cold or hot, they're not allowed to wear boots and go barefoot. They sleep less than 4 hours a day. When they go to the Dharma garden to cultivate, they have to sit on pebbled seats. Winter and summer are no exception. If you want me to go there and practice for a year or 2, I'll accept the hardships. But if you want me to memorize sutras all day, you'd better kill me. Li Shan smiled. You don't know who Long Shou's guru is. Su Fengnian was confused. Li Shan laughed. This person is the only female tantric guru in Mount Lontua. It's said that not only is her dharma boundless, she's also extremely beautiful. She's known as Guanyin in the human world. She can attain the Tao after dual cultivation. After Su Fengnian recovered from his shock, he smirked. If that's the case, it's best if she has something to do with me. Li Shan's smile was strange. Su Fengnian asked cautiously, what's wrong? Does this Guanyin Bodhisattva of Mount Lontua kill without batting an eyelid? Li Shan shook his head. What a merciful heart. Su Fengnian was even more curious. Li Shan laughed and coughed. This Bodhisattva is 42 years old this year. She's exactly twice your age. What a coincidence. Su Fengnian stood up abruptly and was about to go out with his saber to fight the death monk of Mount Lontua. Chapter 65. To the common folk, Mount Lontua had 2 things that tempted them the most. One was that one could become a Buddha on the spot, and the other was that men and women could practice dual cultivation. As for whether it was true or false, people were too far away from Mount Lontua, so it was hard to avoid spreading false information. Plus, no one from Mount Lontua had come out to explain, so it became an unsolved mystery. Su Fengnian supported Mount Lontua's silence. Instead of saying it out loud, it was better to leave it as a memento. Su Fengnian first went to the 3rd floor of the armory to find the old Taoist Wei Baoxiang, who was guarding the pavilion. On this floor, there was a list of characters that was updated regularly. Su Fengnian found the Buddhist book first. There were more than 20 Buddhist sects, big and small. Mount Lontua ranked first among the esoteric sects, so it was the first book of esoteric Buddhism. Su Fengnian easily found the master of esoteric Buddhism. Her title was very long, such as Great Mercy Dharma King, Mending Temple Bodhisattva. Looking at her posture, she was about the same as the 2 old monks in front of her. She was born in the royal family of central India. When she was young, she followed the eminent monks to more than 10 countries and translated countless classics. The most famous one was Mahayana Rising Faith. According to historical records, other than learning from Wang Zhongji and Xiangzi, she also went to the Central Plains to learn astronomy and calendar. She had contact with the 5 schools and 7 sects of Buddhism in the Central Plains. There was a portrait of a female bodhisattva when she was young in the album. It was vivid and lifelike, and it was indeed bright and moving. Su Fengnian exchanged the secret record with the old Taoist surnamed Wei and sighed, 42. She's just a little old. He sighed all the way out of the tide listening pavilion. Qing Niao was waiting respectfully on the table. She was dressed in a green robe. In His Highness's opinion, the only thing this head maid lacked was a good sword. Qing Niao's bearing and elegance were incomparable to the heroines outside. When she saw Su Fengnian, she said respectfully, "That monk is standing at the gate of the prince's mansion." Su Fengnian walked to the pavilion in the middle of the lake and smiled, "Bring him here. I want to meet this esoteric monk. By the way, get the servants to prepare some vegetarian food." No one is allowed to come near the lake. While waiting, Su Fengnian closed his eyes and concentrated. First, he thought about the secrets of Mount Lontua collected by the secret agents of the prince's mansion. Although there were only 200 to 300 people in Mount Lontua, there were many factions with thousands of followers. For example, the Red Sect branch of esoteric Buddhism that monk Longsho belonged to only had 3 representatives in Mount Lontua, but there were millions of followers outside the mountain. Finally, Su Fengnian's mind settled on the portrait of the female esoteric Buddhism master. He shook his head and put this matter aside for the time being. Since he had already left the mountain, he had to start planning carefully for himself. The arsenal was dead, but people were alive. Imitating White Fox's face to read all the secret martial arts manuals, he was not afraid of biting off more than he could chew. When facing an enemy in the future, knowing more moves and routines would increase his chances of survival. This was the same principle as beginners who had to memorize Go moves by rote. Naturally, the more routines one had, the better. Su Fengnian did not dare to say how good his comprehension was, but his memory was indeed better than his second sister, Su Weisheng. Otherwise, he would not have been able to play chess with Li Yishan in the air without chess pieces or a chessboard. Su Fengnian muttered to himself, "It's not realistic to read all the martial arts manuals like White Fox's face, but it's not difficult for him to select and give me 2 or 3 books every day. There will be a day when I will read all the secret martial arts manuals of all the sects in the world." When I left the mountain, I rode an ox and sent a message to the supreme leader, Wang Zhongluo. The tortoise of the Great Yellow Court lives in the body. If I want to convert it all into my own use and cultivate the 3 great yellow halls, I need a few books on Mount Longhu. Borrow? They are all secret things, most likely I can't borrow them. Steal? With my current bladesmanship, it's difficult. Rob? These 2 holy lands of Buddhism, without 6,000 to 7,000 elite Baliang cavalry, don't even think about charging up the mountain. If you want to flatten it, you need at least 13,000 to 14,000 men. Without fighting, if you think 10,000 men can crush the entire Jianghu several times, you're looking down on the heroes of the world. Even if it's Su Shao, without the imperial decree of the capital, mobilizing more than 500 men without authorization is tantamount to a rebellion. If Jiang and I was here and heard this crazy talk linking the cavalry with Jianghu, he would most likely have the urge to poke a hole in His Royal Highness's body with the divine talisman. Sweet potato with a graceful and voluptuous body brought some exquisite vegetarian dishes over. There was no one around the lakeside. No matter how ridiculous His Royal Highness's words were, in the prince's mansion, more effective than the imperial edict. Su Fengnian did not have any misgivings about this servant sister who grew up with him. He said to himself, "It's time to cultivate henchmen. Without a solid team, how can I roam Jianghu? I'll find a chance to talk to Su Shao." Monk Long Shou of Mount Lontua was led into the pavilion by Blue Bird. Su Fengnian gestured for the monk to help himself. The monk in the large cassock did not stand on ceremony, but he only picked up some food and put it into his mouth, chewing slowly. Not to mention filling his stomach, it was difficult to even fill the gaps between his teeth. Just this point of tantric cultivation was unspeakably painful. In the western regions, there were 14 small countries, rejecting the various schools of learning, only worshipping tantric Buddhism. There were the red, yellow and white sects. In the past, when the 9 countries of the Central Plains were in chaos, it was traced back to the war of words between the Confucian faction of Shangyin Academy. However, in the western regions, it was the red, yellow and white sects, more like a fight between immortals. The yellow and white sects had always been powerful. The red sect was more inclined to follow the ancient teachings, the 9 forms of 3 sects, meticulous in their teachings, and most of their focus was on the cultivation of full-circle cultivation. Monk Long Shou's master was the first female Dharma king in the history of Tantric Buddhism. No matter how high the status of those concubines were, they could not be compared to her. Su Fingnian went straight to the point, saying, Master Six Jewels wants to dual cultivate with me. Chapter 66. Monk Long Shou looked calm as he nodded. The monk was expressionless when he talked about dual cultivation. On the contrary, His Royal Highness, who had been through a lot, found it ridiculous. Even Sweet Potato and Blue Bird looked at each other in disbelief. Su Fingnian asked curiously, do all the tantric masters not practice dual cultivation to achieve Dharmakaya Buddha and Sambhogakaya Buddha? The middle-aged monk in the red cassock was still expressionless as he answered, only those who have renounced their desires can achieve supreme yoga. Supreme yoga is the ultimate root of all. Su Fingnian felt a headache coming on. He asked, why me? The monk shook his head. It was obvious that even he did not know the details. If that was the case, Su Fingnian would only go to Mount Lantua if his head was caught in the latrine door. 42 years old was nothing to the Bodhisattva, but to a living woman, it was not young at all. No matter how well she took care of herself, it was not something Su Fingnian could accept. This was not the most important thing. The conflict between the red, yellow, and white sects of Tantric Buddhism had intensified in recent years. Since the secret record said that a six-jeweled master dual cultivation could achieve perfection, why would the more powerful white and yellow sects stupidly allow the red sect to obtain such great merit? Perhaps Su Fingnian would be skinned alive by the monks before he even reached Mount Lantua. After all, some tantric sects like to use skulls with the top of the skull removed as instruments to exorcise ghosts and summon spirits. As for skulls and drums made of human bones, they were common in the history books. Just hearing about them was enough to make one's hair stand on end. The six-jeweled Bodhisattva was very powerful and was respected as the fundamental master. Moreover, the followers of the Red sect believed that she was the incarnation of Amitabha and Guanyin Bodhisattva. The so-called six-jeweled Bodhisattva was rumored to have 6 transformations. Guanyin Bodhisattva, Lotus King Master, and Wrathful Vajra Master sounded invincible. However, no matter how powerful they were still eating dust behind the old monks of Mount Lantua. Su Fingnian did not trust the red sect that was struggling to survive between the yellow and white sections. Other than being afraid of death, he did not wish for Mount Lantua and the female Dharmaraja to disrupt his embryonic plan. It was one thing to refuse to go, but it was another to offend the Crimson sect for no reason. It would be best if he could deal with them. Moreover, the monks from Mount Lantua were all treasures. Su Fingnian forced a smile and explained, I can't leave for the time being. The monk still said the same nonsense, I can wait. Su Fingnian asked curiously, how long can we wait? The monk said slowly, there are still 31 years. Su Fingnian almost vomited blood. What perverted patience. In the future, he would try his best not to have any dealings with Mount Lantua. If someone held a grudge against him, he would never be able to live in peace for the rest of his life. Monk Long Shou, who seemed to be willing to wait for Su Fingnian's children to grow up, did not stay in the prince's mansion. However, he did not leave the city either. Given Bailiang's tolerance towards monks, this strange monk on Mount Lantua would not starve to death. Su Fingnian sat in the pavilion and muttered, ridiculous. Sweet Potato teased, Your Highness, why don't you follow that tantric guru? Su Fingnian raised his head and sighed, she's already a 42-year-old old lady. Even if she's an old cow eating young grass, this is not the way to do it. Sweet Potato sat beside His Royal Highness, her delicate hands kneading with ingenious strength. She smiled charmingly and said, maybe that female bodhisattva has a technique to retain her youthful looks. Su Fingnian glared at her. Blue Bird said indifferently, today is the day of the release of the cards. Su Fingnian perked up. A big fish has taken the bait. Blue Bird said calmly, 2 groups of Jianghu people of unknown origins have gathered in the city. The people in the lead have 3rd-level martial strength. Su Fingnian said regretfully, if it was before, it would have been a big fish. But now, I've seen the world. Sigh. Forget it, it's better than nothing. Sweet Potato smiled. His Royal Highness had an endless stream of playful ideas since he was young. Perhaps it was the result of Su Xiao's lax discipline, or perhaps it was the result of his deliberate indulgence. There was no sign of him restraining himself. In fact, the Pillar State had only said two things in the past 10 years. One was that he was not allowed to touch a blade for 10 years. The other was that he had never taught Su Fengnian how to conduct himself. Whether he was a hedonist, a prodigal son, or a loafer, they were all things that Su Fengnian had figured out on his own. State scholar Li Yuaning did not care about trivial matters. In the past, when his second sister Su Weisheng was at home, it was fine because there was someone who could suppress his Royal Highness. However, when she went to Shengyin Academy to study, Su Fengnian was like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins. He did whatever he wanted, flirting with women, spending a lot of money to buy poetry and literature, keeping evil servants and retainers, closing the door to his enemies and letting their dogs out. He had a lot of fun. No wonder the scholars who had left Liangli and achieved success all cursed his Royal Highness for being ignorant and incompetent. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Pass down the order. Tonight, don't play any tricks of being loose on the outside but tight on the inside. Let them all in at once." Since these fishes and shrimps took advantage of Su Xiao's absence to sneak into the city, they are most likely coming for me. When the time comes, I will wait here. Blue Bird, please invite one swordsman and one machete man from the residence. I want to watch the battle. The moves that these desperados use when they are on the brink of death are the most flexible. Compared to the rigid words in the secret manual, it is much more useful. Blue Bird left quietly. When she did things, no matter how big or small, not a drop of water would leak out. Sweet Potato stretched out her slender index finger, wanting to stroke Su Fengnian's scarlet eyebrows. Su Fengnian grabbed her extremely daring finger and laughed. "Are you rebelling?" Sweet Potato said coquettishly, "Just a touch." Su Fengnian shook his head. Sweet Potato's eyes were filled with resentment. Su Fengnian did not show any tender feelings for the fairer sex. He restrained his expression and frowned bitterly. "Second sister is coming. The residence is going to thunder and rain." Chapter 67. Su Weisheng was not only a big mountain to West Chu's fallen princess, Jiang Enai, but even Sweet Potato, who was easygoing and did not fight for anything, felt a burst of irritation when she heard His Royal Highness mention his second sister Su Weisheng's return to the Fu. However, she concealed her gloominess very well. In terms of acting skills, she seemed to be even more skilled than Su Fengnian when she used fresh human blood as her rouge. His Royal Highness had inherited the cultivation of the Great Yellow Hall, so he had acquired a kind of keen perception of the flow of qi of Buddhism and Taoism. He also had a mysterious perception of martial art masters that his young martial granduncle called, "Not a single fly left behind." However, he still did not realize that Sweet Potato was not the only koi fish that needed to be fed to become plump. The interior of the prince's mansion was a vast universe with all kinds of bizarre tricks. Even His Royal Highness, who had lived on Mount Qingliang since his youth, did not dare to say that he had seen everything. At the very least, the entrance to the Tide Listening Pavilion's 9th floor and the basement 2 floors had not been found. Back then, he and his second sister climbed up and down, knocked on the walls, and chiseled the walls, but they still did not succeed. Su Xiao was happy that his children were busy at home, so that they would not create trouble for him when he left the Fu. His second daughter, Su Weisheng, was adept at scheming openly, while his eldest son, Su Fengnian, was crafty. As long as these two fellows stayed together and whispered to each other, even the de Zhuguo would be frightened. Su Fengnian planned to have dinner with the little girl and the little monk from the north and the south. On the way there, his hands continuously drew circles. The Fu's servants and maids only found it amusing, but they did not understand the slightest bit of it. However, they all praised His Royal Highness's martial art as matchless. Whenever Su Fingnian came across a servant girl with an above-average beauty or a graceful figure, he would take advantage of her. Sweet Potato followed behind him, unconcerned. If a little servant girl dared to fight for a man's favor, she would be beaten to death by a stick if she was not careful. Sweet Potato was not stupid enough to be arrogant just because she was pampered. She did not want to, nor did she dare to. To put it bluntly, the seemingly affectionate His Highness the Crown Prince was the real heartless person. Green Ant's personal maidservants in Wudong Garden probably hadn't noticed this. But that didn't mean that Sweet Potato didn't love His Royal Highness from the bottom of his heart. On the contrary, such a master could make Sweet Potato, who was as proud as Blue Bird, work for him wholeheartedly. Su Fingnian did not know about Sweet Potato's complicated thoughts. He just chuckled softly and said, "This set of 108 styles has no name. I don't know where Bull Rider found it. The more you practice it, the more interesting it becomes. You need to sink your waist into Tai Chi, walk in the 9 palaces, and form yin and yang. Your hand gestures and Chi activity must be pure and natural. There's a lot of attention to be paid to these circles. They form endless circles, and they go back and forth. Sweet Potato, if you like, I'll teach you." Sweet Potato quickened her pace. Her magnificent chest, which was second to none in Wudong Garden, pressed against His Highness the Crown Prince's arm. Her autumn eyes were misty as she said, "Then your Highness must teach this servant step by step." Su Fingnian didn't even turn his head. He just quietly nudged the snow-white pigeon under her clothes with his elbow. As her chest trembled, her charm rippled. He could clearly feel His Royal Highness' charm. He smiled frivolously and said, "I can draw 108 circles here." Sweet Potato's charm was natural, but her tone was bitter. "This servant knows that your Highness is just moving your lips." Su Fingnian didn't refute her. He asked casually, "What do you think Mount Lontua means?" Sweet Potato thought about it seriously and said in a low voice, "This servant thinks that dual cultivation is fake. It wants the white and yellow sects to become enemies with the Bailiang cavalry." Su Fingnian nodded and smiled. "You hit the nail on the head." The people in the capital had long been wary of the esoteric sect of the western regions, which was unruly, but they could not find a suitable reason to make a move. If they could have the Red Sect as a spy, it was possible that the Bailiang cavalry could be used as a pawn again. As for dual cultivation, I've checked the secret records. It's just a rumor that's been spreading for the past few years, so it can't be taken seriously. Especially after my coronation, it was the most intense. From this, it can be seen that I'm in high demand. Even the female Dharma king of Tantra covets me. As for the great national chess player who occupied the world's largest chessboard in the capital, among the 67 posthumous names in the temple, there were only 2 characters that caught his eye. One of them was Gao, meaning Gao, meaning Gao, meaning Gao, meaning Gao, meaning Gao. The first one is Marshal. His military career is glorious, and he has opened up the largest territory of this dynasty. He wants to be known as the Emperor of martial prowess for thousands of years after his death. He is already on the verge of going mad. Sweet Potato's face paled slightly. "Your Highness, please speak softly." Su Fingnian laughed. "It's fine. I dare to say it, but other than you, no one else dares to listen. Let's not talk about this anymore. Sweet Potato, how's the little girl's drawing of eyebrows?" Sweet Potato was visibly relieved. "For the time being, I've only taught her Xiao Shan Mei and Conk Dai Dai. The little girl is a fast learner." Su Fingnian laughed. "As long as she wants to learn, she can learn anything quickly. Old Huang taught her how to roast fish, roast meat, and roast sweet potatoes. She learned it faster than I did. If she didn't want to learn, she wouldn't be able to weave straw sandals or sit painstakingly while fishing." Sweet Potato stared blankly at his Royal Highness, who was different from his usual self. Even though they had been together for a long time, she rarely saw his Royal Highness like this. Her original name was Red Musk. She bit her thin lips, then smiled. She was a natural seductress. Su Shao of the Great Pillar State once joked that this little girl would not be defeated even if she entered the palace as an imperial concubine. After scraping off half a jean of powder, the little girl imitated Sweet Potato and put on light makeup. As expected, she was much more gorgeous than when she didn't put on makeup. However, in Su Fengnian's eyes, the little girl without makeup was more likable. The little monk chanted while peeking and giggling. Su Fengnian was worried about the incense in the little monk's temple. Sweet Potato wasn't qualified to be eaten at the table. Su Fengnian wasn't the kind of master who spoiled his maidservants. As he ate a simple but delicious vegetarian meal with the little monk, he asked, "Miss Li, when are you going home?" "It's almost the new year." The little girl widened her eyes and said with hurt, "Su Fengnian, are you chasing me away?" Su Fengnian was dumbfounded. "Of course not. I'm just afraid that your parents will be worried." The little girl said righteously, "When I first met you, you said that you wouldn't go home even if you starved to death." Su Fengnian smiled. "I was just angry." The little monk, who had been eating with his head lowered, raised his head and interrupted, "Things, we really have to go back to the temple." The little girl said angrily, "Shut up." She had learned this mantra from His Highness the Crown Prince. The little monk fiercely ate 2 mouthfuls of rice, his cheeks bulging. The little girl said with a red face, "Su Fengnian, Sister Sweet Potato taught me how to draw my eyebrows in the afternoon. It sounds more precious than the green swallow branch. I'll pay you back when I get home." Su Fengnian pretended to nod and held back his laughter. "Okay, I've never heard of a heroine in Jianghu who owes money and doesn't pay it back." The little girl liked this kind of words. She said proudly, "That's true." The little monk was outspoken. His little bald head approached his childhood sweetheart whom he had loved for many years. He said worriedly, "Things, I seem to have heard Master's wife say that the snail on your face is very expensive. A poet even wrote that the marrow of 100 golden otter could be exchanged for half a tail of green. If you really pay back the money, I'm afraid Master's alms bowl will be empty." The little girl was surprised. She suddenly frowned and the food was not as fragrant. Su Fengnian saw this but he did not say anything to comfort her. In the blink of an eye, the little girl's mood was cloudy, but in the blink of an eye, she had a sunny disposition. After the meal, she cast aside the troublesome matter of owing money and pulled Sister Sweet Potato into the room to continue her apprenticeship. At home, her parents were stingy and were reluctant to buy rouge for her. The stupid Nan Bei was very generous, but he did not have the money. He said that as long as he attained enlightenment and became a Buddha, he would burn a few relics and she would be able to use them to exchange for countless rouge. In the end, he received a full beating from her. Su Fengnian did not understand the feelings of young girls, so he did not go to the room. He saw the little monk take off his kasaya and wash it in the courtyard with a bucket of water and a wooden board. He was obviously used to being a cow and horse in the little girl's temple. Su Fengnian squatted by the side and looked at the white ivory hook on the green kasaya. He smiled but did not say anything. The little monk said nervously, "Your Highness, this kasaya can't be used as money for rouge. I'll be beaten to death by Master if I give it to you." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Don't worry, I don't want your kasaya. You wear it very well." The little monk was still a little vigilant. Su Fengnian asked, "I remember that abbot is a Taoist term. It's the name of the leader of Taoism's 10-direction forest. How did it become Buddhism's?" The little monk was washing the kasaya. He was a simple-minded person and did not hear the teasing in His Royal Highness' words. He answered seriously, in terms of the origin of the word abbot, the Vimoksha Sutra of India was written 100 years earlier than Taoism's Ben Ming Sutra. Moreover, Master told me that although the great abbot of the temple only lives in a small bedroom of 1 square foot, it can accommodate 3,000 small worlds and 3,000 lion forests. Listen, it's much more powerful than Taoism's heart of heaven. My master has never lost a debate. Oh, he only lost to Master's wife. Su Fengnian was speechless and said, "You Buddhists are powerful, but your master is more powerful." Su Fengnian saw a blue bird standing at the door of the courtyard. He got up and walked over. Blue Bird said sternly, "I heard that the second princess left the main group and rode alone. The 2 groups of Jianghu people are ready to make a move and are preparing to go out of the city." Su Fengnian took off the jade pendant from his waist and threw it to Blue Bird. He squinted and said, "These people are in a hurry to be reincarnated. Go and take the 200 riders of the Phoenix Battalion. Don't forget to take the crossbows and kill them all." Blue Bird turned and left. Su Fengnian stood at the door. Outside the door, there was danger everywhere, but inside the door, it was peaceful. The little monk hung up the wash kasaya and looked inside the room. "It's another sunny day. Lizzie, Master said that I have no comprehension ability, and you also said that I am stupid. I don't practice the 2 dhyana in our temple. You are my dhyana, and you are beautiful." Chapter 68. Although there were 300,000 cavalrymen stationed at the border, the Bailiang border was never peaceful. The Yan-Lu king, Jiaodong king, and the other vassal kings all reported their safety in the same way. Only Su Shao, who had a different surname, complained to the court every year. Beimang also cooperated, sending troops to disturb the border every few days. There was a small battle every year and a big battle every 3 years. Both sides had their victories and losses. As time passed, the officials in the court began to complain that Su Shao had ulterior motives and that he was not satisfied with splitting the land and sealing the border. These scholars, who saw themselves as the trusted aides of the dynasty, were mostly reprimanded by the emperor in the palace. Those who were slightly more serious were demoted out of the capital. Often, after accumulating enough experience in the local provinces, they would be recalled to the central government every 5 or 6 years and given important tasks. As time passed, the scholars who were slow to realize that this was a shortcut to the south. In these years, Lame Su was an unavoidable barrier in the hearts of the scholars. If they did not scold him a few times, they would be embarrassed to call themselves loyal officials. At the last meeting at the end of the year, the newly promoted Grand Scholar of Wuying Hall, Wen Shouxin, had his servants carry a coffin all the way to the gate of the imperial city. The important official, who was not even 50 years old, asked for death with a blood letter in order to get rid of the emperor's subordinates. The scholars in the capital all clapped and cheered. In Bailiang, the Su flag flapped in the wind. Under the flag, the great pillar of the country, Su Shao, rode slowly. There was only one handsome man beside him. His face was like jade, and he had the spirit of a scholar. However, he was dressed in military attire. He did not carry a sword and was empty-handed. A fine jade belt was tied around his waist, making him stand out from the crowd. The rest of the northern Liang's generals had to pull a long distance away from him. Su Shao received a secret report from the capital and laughed lightly, "Get rid of the emperor's subordinates. I am thousands of miles away from the emperor. These old scholars don't know how to save their energy to go home and deal with the beautiful concubines in their rooms." The elegant man in his 30s smiled but did not say anything. He rode beside Butcher Su Shao. His expression was calm, and his imposing manner did not lose out too much. The common people all over the world said that the powerful king of Bailiang had a hunchback because he was burdened with hundreds of thousands of lonely souls and wild ghosts who refused to return to their homes. The reason why he was crippled was that he was tied down by the vengeful spirit of the #1 general of the old 9 kingdoms. These common people took delight in talking about it, so naturally, they would be scoffed at by the scholars who considered themselves as officials. Lame Su had been in the army for his entire life and had been injured countless times. How was he a devil with 3 heads and 6 arms? He was clearly a martial artist who had usurped power. Furthermore, how many years had it been since Lame Su had returned to the capital? Other than the older officials in the court, most of them had never interacted with the Pillar State before. They had never even met him. Under the heavens, who would be intimidated by this false reputation? Su Xiao gripped the reins and looked toward the northeast. With the horsewhip in his hand, he raised his arm and pointed to several places. He sighed ruefully, I have not been there for too long. The old fellows who opposed me for several decades are either old or dead. It seems like no one remembers my vicious and merciless methods. Right now these young people are remonstrating with death. It is indeed lively, but it lacks a bit of sincerity. If this goes on, sooner or later these scholars will harm the country with their idle talk. What happened to West Chu in the past? They won the hearts of the people and the hearts of the scholars. Right now Beimang is valiant like wolves and tigers. They have coveted the country for a long time. I dare say that as soon as the Beiliang cavalry retreats, just relying on those cowardly generals of Yan Lu and Jiaodong, they will cry for their father and cry for their mother after several charges. The barbarians in the southeast are hard to tame. Suppressing them will lead to peace, retreating will lead to rebellion. Rebellions are unpredictable. It is hard to guarantee that there are no traitors or traitors fanning the flames behind the scenes. The Western region's military, civil and religious forces are integrated into one body. They are known to be a solid piece of iron, virtually impervious to oil and salt. I don't care, the well water does not interfere with the river water. Alright, now even that esoteric Buddhism's red sect is starting to have designs on my son. Go to her place for Shuangshou. Won't that make me a son-in-law who lives in his family? This woman is really tired of living. Do you believe that Laozi will take the cavalry and kidnap her from Mount Lantua to Beiliang and make her my son's slave? The elegant-looking man's smile deepened. He did not doubt that the Pillar State would march straight into the western region for thousands of li. It was not appropriate for the cavalry to go east, but if the horses' hooves were to go west, the imperial court would be very happy to see it happen. This man did not speak much. He held the reins with one hand and put the other hand on his waist buckle. This dragon-patterned jade buckle had a very deep history. It was carved with 2 dragons fighting over the Ganoderma. It was the favorite of Yi Baikue, the head of the 4 great generals in the past. It was only taken off after his death and Su Xiao personally gave it to the man beside him. This trusted subordinate was Qin Jibao. The prestige of Beiliang's 300,000 cavalry was second only to Su Zhao's little butcher. It was he who had single-handedly forced him and Yi Baikue into a life-or-death situation. Before the final battle where the 2 armies were evenly matched, Qin Jibao rode out and dragged 2 peerless beauties with 2 ropes. In the end, he stabbed the wife and daughter of the unparalleled general to death. After this almost certain battle, Qin Jibao, who had already killed countless surrendered soldiers, became famous again. Su Xiao smiled and asked, Jibao, how long has it been since you last saw my family's Wei Xiong? Little Butcher's face was sharp and determined, but there was a subtle gentleness in it. However, his tone was still respectful. Reporting to Godfather, it has been 4 years. Su Xiao urged the horse to gallop. He laughed and said, then you have to be careful. She rushed back to Beiliang this time and is not in a good mood. Qin Jibao swung the reins and followed. Northern Liang's valiant generals were as numerous as clouds, and their ferocious soldiers were innumerable. The only one who could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Great Pillar State was Qin Jibao, who always wore a white robe when he was not wearing armor. A horse galloped. The horse was the red snake that appeared in the ancient painting, 9 Horses painting. Even experts who knew horses did not think that such a spiritual horse really existed. The red snake was the land mount of the Dragon King after he transformed into a human. Its forehead was 9 feet tall and its fists were like a unicorn. The most mysterious thing was that there was a pair of red snakes dormant in the horse's nose. When the horse died, it would come out and find a new master. On the back of the red snake horse sat a plain-looking woman in a green robe. There was an ancient sword at her waist, simple and unadorned. The horse galloped so fast that dust flew like a line. She could already see the top of the city in the distance. In the city, there was a commotion everywhere. Half of Bailiang's army, more than 300 cavalrymen armed with swords and crossbows, rushed out in full force and charged through the bustling city. They split into 2 groups and surrounded 2 inconspicuous inns. Back then, when the king of Bailiang, Su Shao, stepped into Jianghu on horseback, it was different from the past wars. Every cavalryman was equipped with the current Phoenix Battalion's equipment. They wore light armor, which made it easier for them to fight while on horseback. Other than the generals who had amazing physical strength who could wield Modeo, the rest of the cavalrymen carried standard cold swords. The archers carried 2 barrels of arrows, more than 40 of them. Chapter 69. If it was a one-on-one fight, other than the Bailiang generals who had made their name through hundreds of battles and some fierce soldiers who came from the green forests and grasslands, or the Jianghu sects, no one would be able to fight against the people of the Jianghu sections. But when the Bailiang cavalry gathered more than 100 men, the strength of their teamwork, honed through piles of corpses on the battlefield, became apparent. This was especially true when an entire battalion of cavalry was advancing in an orderly manner, either on horseback or with crossbows in hand. Very few enemies could break their edge. Moreover, the butcher Su Shao had never lacked lackeys who were completely opposite in skill and character. When this group of people killed Jianghu people who came from the same routes as the Bailiang cavalry, they were even more adept than the Bailiang cavalry. A head was worth 10 taels of gold or dozens of taels of gold. There were even some sect leaders whose heads were worth thousands of taels of gold. On top of that, they were given several secret manuals and official titles when they succeeded. Who wouldn't go crazy with killing? In any case, the best wool grew on the body of the fat sheep. Su Shao was the best at using the method of quenching thirst with the hope of plum blossoms to drive people to work for him. The billowing smoke that ignited in Jianghu was practically a catastrophe that hadn't been seen in 300 years. Otherwise, how could Su Fengnian be targeted by enemies who were as numerous as carps crossing the river? Perhaps it was because the Jianghu heroes felt that killing Su Shao was as difficult as ascending to the heavens, and killing the 2 young daughters was beneath their dignity. Killing that idiot Su Longxiang wasn't considered a real man either. Therefore, they all aimed the tip of their swords and spears at the innocent and pitiful His Royal Highness. Not all the Jianghu heroes who bore a blood feud were willing to go to Bailiang Palace like moths to a flame. For so many years, wave after wave, none of them had returned. Revenge was the most important thing, but what could they do if they lost their lives? Which one of them was an idiot to be able to fight against the king of Bailiang, Su Zhao's character? Now, there was even a secret rumor that the hedonistic heir apparent was an extremely sinister bastard. Who knew when, while lying on the fair belly of a courtesan, he came up with the vicious idea of opening the door before letting the dog bite people. This made them beat their chests and stamp their feet. Although this heir apparent was an idiot who didn't know how to help the people, he had learned a lot from the butcher Su Shao when it came to harming people. He truly deserved to be killed. At this time, His Royal Highness, who everyone thought deserved to be killed, and the little girl came to a street far away from one of the inns. Su Fengnian bought 2 sticks of candied haws from a roadside stall. Don't expect His Royal Highness, who rarely carried money when he went out, to pay for it. The little girl was very impressed when she saw Su Fengnian take the candied haws and leave without being chased for debt or beaten. It couldn't be helped. Even though she had seen the grandeur of Bailiang Palace, the little girl still couldn't connect the beggar Su Fengnian with his royal highness. In her opinion, Su Fengnian was more pleasing to the eye when he was sallow and emaciated. It was more interesting to sit with her on the willow tree by the riverside and tie twigs. It was more enjoyable to support her in a quarrel with the village women. Alas, what was so good about his royal highness? A penniless Su Fengnian was enough. The little girl stuck out her tongue and licked the candied haws, thinking very gloomily. Su Fengnian said that a young girl's feelings were always poetic. So, at her age, no matter how gloomy or sad she was, she would still look good. When she became a young married woman, she would be finished. He said that a young married woman's feelings were always poetic. She didn't quite understand, but she knew that it was definitely not a good thing. Every time he laughed wickedly, someone would suffer. Where did old Huang, who had suffered the most, go? She thought for a while and didn't ask. Su Fengnian chewed on the candied haws and was in a good mood when he heard the cold whooshing sounds of crossbows in the distance and the mournful wails that followed. He wasn't worried about scaring the little girl beside him who wanted to go out with him. In the past, Su Fengnian and old Huang had worked hard to set a trap and catch a small wild boar. At first, Su Fengnian didn't get the hang of it, and his knife wasn't sharp enough. The wild boar with rough skin and thick flesh didn't die after a few stabs. She couldn't stand it and took the knife to stab the wild boar to death. No wonder she said that she wanted to be a heroine and not one of those noble ladies who smiled without showing their teeth. Su Fengnian liked her as if she was his own sister. So, as she was different from anyone else in the prince's residence. She was probably old Huang's only close friend when he was alive. Su Fengnian stopped chewing on the candied haws and stared at the young man and woman at the corner of the alley in front of him. The little girl looked up and saw Su Fengnian laughing wickedly again. She only pulled on his sleeve and cleverly didn't say anything. Su Fengnian blinked and shook his head at the little girl, then walked forward alone. The young woman held the young man's hand tightly and shook her head. "Senior don't go. The matter has already been exposed. If we go, we will die. 100 or 200 Bailiang cavalry is not something we can deal with." The man surnamed his eyes were red and his face was pale. He said with grief and indignation, "Junior sister, your father and mother are there. If not for master and mistress taking me in, I would have starved to death on the streets. A master for a day is a father for life. Even if I die, I will go." Facing the tragedy of her parents dying, the woman was still calm and cold-blooded. She tightened her grip on her senior brother's wrist and gritted her teeth. "Senior if you die, you won't even be able to see Su Fengnian and Su Weisheng's faces. How can you die like this? Is this filial piety or filial piety?" That senior martial brother was still determined to meet his death. The beautiful woman let go of his hand and slapped his face. She sneered, "Then you can die." Without her senior brother, she spat out a few words with every step she took. "I want to live. That Su Fengnian is weak but lustful. Even if I enter a brothel, I won't regret it. I will first give my body to His Royal Highness a few times until he is completely numb and careless. After being played by him a few times, I will stab him a few times when I kill him. This prince doesn't know what's good for him and claims that he never destroys flowers. I want him to die in the land of warmth and tenderness." The senior brother's heart ached, but he still walked forward. Jianghu grudges end in Jianghu, and Jianghu men die in Jianghu. This may be stupid, but Jianghu is not like the palace. There are many fools who only know filial piety. They don't care about foolish filial piety. After he walked away, the woman said disdainfully, "My parents raised this kind of trash for more than 20 years for nothing." Well scolded. He doesn't understand the big picture at all. He will die in vain. "Miss, you are the one who can endure humiliation. If I were His Royal Highness, I wouldn't be willing to kill a beauty like you. The woman turned around in horror and saw a young master in brocade clothes leaning against the wall. He had a smile on his face and held a stick of candied haws in his left hand. She had seen a portrait that she was almost tired of looking at. Therefore, she recognized the man in front of her, even if he turned into ashes. However, in the portrait, His Royal Highness's eyes were frivolous and weak. At this time, he should be called Su Fengnian. Why did he have a domineering aura? Before she could use her glib tongue, the winter-embroidered knife was unsheathed. A crack several feet deep appeared on the thick wall behind her. The woman's head fell to the ground. Su Fengnian threw away the stick of candied haws and looked at the head on the ground. He said calmly, "Who said I don't kill women?"